Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is part 1 of our story. If you like this What If story and want to see part 2, let me know in the comments below. Before we start, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Also, check the description for more great content and my playlist. This story was posted by YotsubaAnna on Wattpad. Now let's start. 𝐼𝐻. A small boy whispered to his father, asking him to tell the story again. The man, dressed in black with unusual stitches on his face, chuckled and replied that the boy had heard it so many times that he had practically memorized it. The boy insisted, and the man relented, calling him his little bird. He began the tale, recounting the adventures of a boy named Izuku. As Izuku ran along the coastline of the beach he had cleaned up while training to wield his new quirk, he breathed heavily. All Might was there too, sitting on the sand and watching the waves. Izuku smiled, reflecting on how far he had come. All Might glanced at him and asked if he was going to sit down or just stand there. Izuku nodded and took a seat beside him. All Might reminded him that he didn't have to follow him everywhere. Izuku smiled and explained that having All Might around helped him focus and believe he could become a hero. All Might inspired him more than anything. He looked at the appealing scene before them and expressed a longing to spend as much time as possible with All Might before things changed. He paused, looking down at his hands, acknowledging the weight of their situation. All Might smiled sadly and suggested they not dwell on it too much, assuring Izuku that he still had time. Izuku glanced at him, remembering the recent loss of 𝐼𝐻 and how All Might had not spoken much about it. He sighed and suggested that All Might should have asked 𝐼𝐻 to use his foresight again to see if his future had changed. All Might laughed lightly, claiming that his future was already different since he was there. They sat in silence for a while, watching the waves. In those moments, Izuku wished they could stay like that forever, wishing that such dreams could come true. Everything seemed to move in slow motion as Izuku fell. The calls of his friend 𝐾𝐿 and some classmates reached his ears, but their words were lost to him. Memories flashed before his eyes, from his first meeting with 𝐾𝐿 to the challenges he faced in middle school, meeting All Might, getting into UA, and finally the events of 2 weeks prior. 2 weeks earlier, Izuku had been running through the rubble of a demolished building, 𝐾𝐿 close behind. There had been an increase in suspicious activity since All Might's retirement, and many great pro-heroes had gone missing, some found later but tragically deceased. They reached a clearing that bore the marks of a fierce battle, an unsettling familiarity lingering in the air. Izuku stopped to examine the area for survivors, dust swirling around them, making it difficult to see and breathe. He squinted through the haze and noticed a hole surrounded by rubble. After a moment of searching, he heard breathing coming from the edge of the debris. He glanced back at 𝐾𝐿, who nodded in acknowledgement. They crept quietly through the fog toward the sound. With a sudden burst of determination, Izuku jumped over a small piece of wall, ready to confront whatever lay ahead. What he saw caught him off guard. He landed softly, tears welling in his eyes as he took in the sight before him. 𝐾𝐿 stood frozen, his expression a mix of shock and sorrow. Izuku stepped forward, his heart sinking as he recognized the man who had once been the symbol of peace, now gravely injured. Blood seeped from a wound in his stomach, and his clothes were tattered and stained. It was clear that even if help arrived, it would be too late. The man was still breathing, his sad eyes locking onto Izuku's. Izuku took a few more steps forward, collapsing in front of him, unable to meet his gaze as tears streamed down his face. He whispered an apology, feeling the weight of his failure to save him. The man shifted slightly, rasping out Izuku's name, causing a fresh trickle of blood to escape his lips. He reached out, grasping Izuku's hand with a cold, trembling grip. Izuku looked up, his heart breaking at the sight of the once mighty hero. The man urged him to remember something for when the time was right, but his voice faltered, and silence fell between them. Izuku's eyes widened as he realized the light in the man's blue eyes was fading. The grip on his hand loosened, and the man fell still. All Might was gone. Overwhelmed by grief, Izuku sobbed openly, wrapping his arms around All Might's lifeless body. He heard quiet sniffles behind him but ignored them, lost in his sorrow. Minutes later, other heroes and police arrived. and 𝐾𝐿 had to gently pry Izuku away from All Might. As they took the fallen hero away, Izuku couldn't stop crying. He clung tightly to 𝐾𝐿, who surprisingly embraced him back. With his face buried in 𝐾𝐿's chest, Izuku continued to cry until exhaustion took over, and he fell into unconsciousness. After class, everyone seemed to be avoiding both Deku and 𝐾𝐿, leaving the room quickly and without a word. The only exception was the man in a sleeping bag, who rolled out the door. During class, 𝐾𝐿 had kept his head down, his hair obscuring his face, making it hard to tell if he was paying attention. He hadn't spoken at all, which was unusual for him. As Deku packed his last notebook into his bag and began to walk out, he felt a hand on his shoulder. Turning around, he braced himself for 𝐾𝐿's usual intensity. 𝐾𝐿 looked at the ground, his expression unreadable, and he seemed to be trembling, opening and closing his fists. Deku asked what was wrong, but 𝐾𝐿 remained silent. After a moment of stillness, 𝐾𝐿 let out a strange sound, as if he were debating whether to speak. Finally, he looked up, and Deku was taken aback. 𝐾𝐿's eyes were red and slightly swollen, and his bottom lip was bleeding, likely from biting it. The bruise on his forehead was particularly alarming. Deku gasped, expressing concern for 𝐾𝐿's well-being. 𝐾𝐿 didn't respond and returned his gaze to his shoes. Gripping 𝐾𝐿's shoulders, Deku shook him gently, pleading for answers about who had hurt him. He couldn't fathom who could have done this to 𝐾𝐿, knowing how strong he was. Noticing 𝐾𝐿's collar pulled up and his sleeves down to his wrists, Deku reached for his arm, but 𝐾𝐿 pulled away. Confusion filled Deku's mind as he wondered why someone would attack 𝐾𝐿. Just then, 𝐾𝐿 called out to him, snapping Deku out of his thoughts. Before he could process it, 𝐾𝐿 enveloped him in a tight hug, startling Deku and causing him to stumble back slightly. 𝐾𝐿's grip tightened, and Deku winced, struggling to breathe. He tried to tell 𝐾𝐿 he was holding him too tightly, but 𝐾𝐿 only loosened his hold slightly while still keeping him close. An apology slipped from 𝐾𝐿's lips, but he said something else that Deku couldn't catch. Not wanting to press him further in his current state, Deku waited patiently until 𝐾𝐿 finally released him and hurriedly left the room. Deku stood there, stunned, for a few moments before leaving the classroom himself. It was the weekend, and he decided to visit his mom, having not seen her much lately. As he walked out, he found himself surrounded by a group of unfamiliar students. One of them stepped forward with a menacing grin, suggesting they teach 𝐾𝐿 a lesson. Deku's eyes widened in alarm, and he instinctively stepped back, only to be grabbed from behind. He attempted to activate his quirk, but it failed. One of the students must have a quirk similar to Mr. Aizawa's, rendering him powerless. Panic surged through him as he struggled, unable to move his arms. Moments later, Deku found himself on the ground, beaten and bruised. They had dragged him to a secluded area outside the school to attack him. Blood trickled down his forehead, and pain radiated from his stomach and legs. Tears streamed down his face as he questioned what he had done to deserve this. Fortunately, someone arrived to intervene, sparing him from further harm. However, his vision was blurry from crying, and he couldn't see who it was. He only remembered being lifted off the ground and carried away before everything went dark. When Deku opened his eyes, it felt as though he had been asleep for hours. He heard a familiar voice, that of Recovery Girl, as she commented on his condition and the fight he had been in. She mentioned 𝐾𝐿 and questioned why he had attacked Deku. The mention of 𝐾𝐿 made Deku's heart race. After Recovery Girl left, he heard footsteps approaching his bed. 𝐾𝐿 appeared, bandaged and looking concerned. He asked if Deku was alright, to which Deku replied with frustration, unsure of why he was in the recovery room. 𝐾𝐿 snorted, expressing relief that he had found Deku before things got worse. Deku, still confused, asked why people were acting differently. He rambled on about not understanding what was happening and whether he had missed something important. Suddenly, a loud slam echoed through the room, startling Deku. He turned to see 𝐾𝐿, bandaged from their earlier encounter, standing there, his expression a mix of concern and determination. He slammed his hand against the wall, using his quirk to create a loud boom that echoed in the room, leaving a scorch mark behind. The sudden noise left me a bit shocked, and I remained silent, looking down at my hands. He sighed and lowered his hand. He explained that he hadn't mentioned the issue earlier because he thought I wasn't involved, believing I hadn't started anything. However, he realized he was mistaken, and now we were facing the consequences. I looked at him, confused, as his words didn't make much sense. All I understood was that there was a problem, and I was now part of it. He groaned and face-bombed, expressing his frustration. Despite being knowledgeable, I seemed to miss the point. He had hoped I would grasp the situation without him needing to spell it out. Then, he looked me in the eyes and revealed the weight of the matter. People were blaming us for 𝐼𝐻𝐬𝐷's death. A few days later, life was far from normal. The world seemed to be in a somber state due to 𝐼𝐻𝐬𝐷's death. After the burial, a memorial was held, and it felt like one thing after another was happening. Soon enough, they were back at school. As I approached the gate, my mind was racing with thoughts. What would they teach today? Would it be any different from when he was still here? Would there be a new teacher to replace him? Would they cancel hero class? Would we get a free day? Suddenly, someone snarled at me after I accidentally bumped into them in the hallway. I quickly apologized, looking down at my red shoes, feeling exhausted. The other person shot me a look of disgust, and I realized I probably looked disheveled again. The person shouted at me, questioning if my apology would change anything. As I stood there, I felt the eyes of other students on us, and I winced. I mumbled that it didn't hurt to apologize. He glared at me, insisting that my apology wouldn't be enough for what I had done. Confused, I wondered what I had done to offend him. I tried to explain that I was sorry if I had upset him, but before I could finish, he shoved me to the floor. Looking up, I noticed most students either glaring or laughing at me. Just then, a familiar voice cut through the tension. 𝐾𝐿 appeared, looking annoyed until he saw me on the ground. The guy who had pushed me sneered, asking if 𝐾𝐿 was there to save me. Laughter erupted from the crowd. Moments later, a loud explosion echoed through the hallway, causing most students to flee in fear while others remained, glaring at 𝐾𝐿. 𝐾𝐿 challenged them, ready for a fight, and I slowly got up, trying not to get involved. Just then, I heard loud footsteps approaching. Mr. Izuku's bored voice commanded everyone to get to class before he expelled them. I turned to see him wrapped in his sleeping bag, resembling a giant caterpillar. I sighed in relief that he had arrived before anything worse could happen. The other students quickly scattered to their classes. I glanced at 𝐾𝐿, who didn't look well. Ever since 𝐼𝐻𝐬𝐷's death, he had changed. He appeared exhausted, his hair spiked but dull, and his eyes lacked their usual fiery passion. He had also been acting differently, not yelling at me or speaking to me much at all. Mr. Izuku called us problem children as he walked to class, and we followed behind him. Upon entering the classroom, the atmosphere was tense. Some students glared at us while others ignored us or continued their conversations. Mr. Izuku instructed everyone to return to their seats, and they quickly complied as class began. At lunchtime, I walked to the cafeteria alone since 𝗟𝗏𝐻𝐬 and Iida had decided to go ahead without me. Behind me, I could sense 𝐾𝐿's anger. As I walked, I noticed other students following along, overhearing snippets of their conversations. They were talking about us, questioning why we were still there and calling us villains. I glanced back to see a few students staring at us before quickly looking away. 𝐾𝐿's loud voice broke the tension as he yelled at them, demanding to know what they were looking at. They moved further away from him, leaving a space that was usually filled with his friends. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was somehow my fault. Processing. Deku felt a surge of disbelief wash over him. 𝐾𝐿 quickly placed a hand over his mouth, silencing his exclamation. After a moment, he removed his hand, shooting Deku a fierce glare. Yet, there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes, as if he shared the same frustration. 𝐾𝐿 expressed his thoughts on the situation, noting that the others were acting irrationally, projecting their anger onto them. He dismissed the others as foolish, suggesting that they were simply looking for someone to blame. Deku pondered the implications of 𝐾𝐿's words, realizing that the strange behavior of their peers stemmed from resentment. Some were still undecided about their feelings towards him and 𝐾𝐿. As the realization dawned on him, Deku hesitantly asked if 𝐾𝐿's injuries were a result of the backlash from their classmates. He wondered if he had suffered the same fate. 𝐾𝐿 remained silent, leaving Deku to grapple with his thoughts. Deku acknowledged that seeking help from Recovery Girl was a wise choice, but he worried about the future. He felt a wave of despair wash over him as he contemplated the possibility of further confrontations. The loss of All Might weighed heavily on him, intensifying his feelings of guilt and self-loathing. He had tried to maintain a cheerful demeanor, convincing himself that everything was fine, even when it clearly wasn't. With tears welling in his eyes, he rubbed them with the back of his hand. 𝐾𝐿's voice broke through his thoughts, but Deku chose to ignore him, burying his face in the pillow to stifle his sobs. He felt embarrassed by his vulnerability. 𝐾𝐿 made a promise to Deku, vowing to stay by his side and offer support whenever needed. He emphasized the importance of their friendship, albeit with a hint of reluctance in his tone. Deku lifted his head from the pillow, meeting 𝐾𝐿's gaze. Despite the initial boredom in his expression, a spark of determination shone through. A smile broke across Deku's face, feeling a sense of warmth at 𝐾𝐿's words. 𝐾𝐿, however, quickly dismissed the sentiment, telling Deku not to push his luck. He turned away, but not before Deku caught a glimpse of a smirk, hinting at the bond they shared. It had been 5 days since the incident that had changed everything. The atmosphere was heavy with tension, and it felt as if everyone viewed them as worse than any villain they had ever encountered. There were whispers that they had somehow been responsible for All Might's downfall, possibly seeking fame since they were the last ones seen with him. News reports had only fueled the animosity, leading to a barrage of hateful comments online. 𝐾𝐿 was always by their side now, almost as if they were best friends again. Shoto was one of the few who still spoke to them, along with Shinso Hitoshi and Mei Hatsum. Most of the class remained divided, with Mina and Kirishima treating them as friends, while Uraraka and Ito were still caught in the debate. The big three occasionally defended them, though Mirio was still unable to use his quirk. Due to their work studies, they weren't around much. Most of the class ignored them, and the teachers seemed unaware of the situation, except for Aizawa-sensei, who had grown stricter but treated them with a protective concern. He even allowed them to leave the classroom if they wished. Unfortunately, the hostility from their peers had escalated. Some students had become more aggressive, seeking out confrontations, while others silently supported the bullying. 𝐾𝐿 and they had visited Recovery Girl's office more than 30 times, and she had informed Aizawa-sensei of the situation. He had sent them home for a day to discuss it with their parents, leaving their mother in tears and adding to the guilt they felt. Days later, they faced glares and shouts from strangers on the streets. Rumors had spread that they were involved in All Might's demise, supposedly collaborating with the League of Villains. The source of these rumors was a mystery, but they were spreading rapidly online. 𝐾𝐿 had confirmed it, and the weight of despair began to settle in. It was a feeling of helplessness that had lingered since that day when All Might had told them they couldn't be a hero. The emptiness was overwhelming, and they found themselves withdrawing from everyone except 𝐾𝐿. Then, something unexpected happened. A voice called out to them, and they looked up to see Shinso waving from across the school garden. They smiled, ready to respond, but a nagging thought urged them to dismiss the interaction. They blinked in confusion, shaking their head to clear their mind. It was probably nothing. They approached Shinso, putting on a smile. He asked if they wanted to hang out with the group, including Mina, Kirishima, and Mei, and mentioned that they could bring 𝐾𝐿 along. They agreed, excited about the prospect of spending time with friends. However, a voice in their head questioned whether they were truly invited, suggesting that perhaps Shinso only wanted 𝐾𝐿 there. They dismissed the thought, mumbling to themselves, only to realize they had spoken aloud. After a brief, awkward exchange, they hurried off, book in hand, trying to shake off the lingering self-doubt. As they walked, they stumbled, landing on the floor with a thud. Rubbing their forehead, they reminded themselves to pay attention while walking. The hallway was empty, but they felt a wave of embarrassment wash over them. They picked themselves up, determined to focus on their goal of becoming a hero. They wanted to save people, not show them their weaknesses. As they made their way back to the dorms, familiar voices echoed behind them. They quickened their pace, hoping to avoid notice, but the taunts followed. The shout rang out, calling them the villain kid, and they broke into a full sprint toward the safety of the dorms, realizing too late that they were too far from safety. Listening to what the boy had said, the narrator decided to change tactics. Right now, he saw the boy as someone who enjoyed seeing him in pain. The narrator hoped that with his words, the boy would fight back and do the opposite of what was suggested, proving him wrong. But that didn't happen. Slowly, he gained control of the boy's body, pushing his mind back to rest peacefully without waking him. He got up, feeling the body ache with pain, and leaned against the wall, hissing as he pressed against his bruised back. What type of heroes would do this? Honestly, he cared for the boy. The entire point of his existence was to protect him, though he did it in a rather unconventional way. Earlier, he had hoped the boy would show his fighting spirit and prove everyone wrong once again. But instead, the boy went along with it, politely disagreeing. He limped toward the dorms, hoping someone would find him, unless they were 𝐼𝐼𝐻𝐿 or idiots. Classes were over, meaning most people had either left to hang out with friends or were in their rooms doing homework. This was great. He would have to bring the boy all the way to 𝗟𝗏𝐷 room. He wondered how long that would take. Then a familiar voice called out, and he winced at the sound. He stumbled toward the source of the voice, trying not to fall flat on his face. He saw a group of people, a redhead, a purple-haired guy, a girl with pink hair, and an angry Pomeranian. They rushed toward him, and he let go of his grip on the boy's body, making it seem like he had passed out. This was going to be an interesting conversation later. A while later, the boy woke up, feeling as if he were falling through a frozen lake. He gasped for breath, sitting up quickly, breathing hard. The nurse stood beside the bed, telling him to calm down and rest. She informed him that she would let his friends know he was awake and then left the room. He wondered how he had ended up there. It hadn't been easy, the narrator thought. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, and the door burst open, revealing a very tired 𝐾𝐿. The boy's eyes lit up, but he was cut off when 𝐾𝐿 pulled him into a tight hug. This was still so strange for him. 𝐾𝐿 pulled back, gripping his shoulders tightly. He expressed relief that the boy was okay, mentioning that he had been out for almost a day and a half and that the group had been worried sick. The boy scratched the back of his head awkwardly, apologizing for worrying them. 𝐾𝐿 sighed and asked why the boy didn't stand up for himself, insisting he knew he could. The boy looked down at his legs, feeling uncertain. He admitted that he couldn't bring himself to hurt anyone, even in self-defense, thinking he deserved it. 𝐾𝐿 flicked his forehead, insisting that no one deserved to be treated that way. The boy reminded 𝐾𝐿 that he hadn't thought that way in middle school, and 𝐾𝐿 fell silent. The boy quickly apologized, but 𝐾𝐿 reassured him that it was fine. The boy sighed, stating that the past was in the past and that what mattered was what 𝐾𝐿 was doing now. 𝐾𝐿 nodded, still not looking up. Footsteps echoed again, and the boy tensed when he saw 𝗟𝗏𝐷 and 𝗏𝐿. 𝐾𝐿 noticed and stood up, turning to face them while pulling the boy behind him. He acted like a bodyguard. 𝗟𝗏𝐷 stepped forward, reaching out, but no sound came from her mouth. 𝗏𝐿 stood there looking ashamed. 𝐾𝐿 asked what they were doing there, and the boy looked at his hands, avoiding eye contact. 𝗟𝗏𝐷 began to apologize, but the boy interrupted, expressing his disappointment that they had ignored him for so long. He questioned if they would have his back if they were in his shoes, smiling sadly at them. 𝐾𝐿 maintained a stern face, but the boy could sense his amusement. 𝗟𝗏𝐷 stammered an apology, and 𝗏𝐿 stood straight again, stating he respected the boy's decision and hoped to earn back his friendship. The boy felt a mix of emotions, realizing he had been too harsh. 𝐾𝐿 shifted slightly, looking up at him with surprise. He commented on how he thought the boy would quickly forgive them, but he found the boy's response impressive. The boy huffed, explaining that if he were to defend himself, he had to start somewhere. 𝐾𝐿 snorted, teasing him about the friends he chose to confront. The boy smiled, reminding 𝐾𝐿 that they weren't his childhood best friends. After that, 𝗏𝐿 and 𝗟𝗏𝐷 began talking to them again, signaling a potential new beginning. The group was now targeted by others, which made Izuku feel it was his fault once again. Nowadays, he kept his distance from most of his classmates, only spending time with 𝐾𝐿. The other students had become much more aggressive, seizing every opportunity to attack them, both physically and mentally. Even those who had previously ignored them began to express their anger. Izuku and 𝐾𝐿 defended themselves, with 𝐾𝐿 often taking the lead. Despite Izuku's warnings that their friends could get hurt, they still intervened. The teachers seemed oblivious to the situation, preoccupied with a special case related to 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐸's death. As days passed, the attacks grew more frequent and intense. Soon, they found it increasingly difficult to fend for themselves. Even 𝐾𝐿 struggled to fight back against the overwhelming aggression. Mr. Izuku decided that they should pack their belongings and return home each night instead of staying at the heights. This worried Izuku, as his mother would see him come home each day with more injuries than the last. The sight of her tears broke his heart, leaving him feeling empty and strange. A few days later, the weekend arrived. Izuku walked home alone, tuning out the shouts of torment and hatred that echoed around him. He focused on his red shoes, avoiding eye contact with anyone, feeling their glares as he passed by. Upon entering the house, he was met with an unsettling silence. He called out for his mother, placing his bag down and taking off his shoes. The apartment felt cold and lifeless as he moved through the rooms in search of her. "Mom," he called again, but received no response. It was strange. Her shoes were by the door, indicating she should be home. Finally, he reached her room. He hesitated before opening the door, a creeping sensation running through him. He braced himself for what he might find. As he opened the door, his heart sank. In the middle of the room lay his mother, 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽𝐸. He stumbled toward her, feeling a wave of despair wash over him. He sat beside her, cradling her head in his arms, tears streaming down his face. She had injuries that suggested a violent struggle, and her eyes, once filled with warmth, now held an emptiness that shattered his heart. He gently closed her eyes, choking back a sob as the weight of his sorrow consumed him. A voice called out to him, but he couldn't hear it over the overwhelming sensation that enveloped him. In a moment of disbelief, he began to laugh, the sound echoing in the silence, as if he were on the edge of a precipice. Minutes later, the police arrived after someone reported hearing unsettling laughter from the house. They took 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽's body and questioned Izuku, who answered as best as he could. They expressed their condolences and assured him they would investigate the mysterious circumstances. Since he was old enough to be home alone, they left him there, the weight of his loss heavy in the air. My eyes slowly opened. I was lying against the wall where I had been left after a severe beating that caused me to lose consciousness. My uniform was dirty and stained, reminiscent of 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐽. An odd feeling returned, but this time it brought me a sense of happiness. I looked down at myself. My legs were covered in bruises, and my stomach bore the same marks. A bruise on my eye was swollen, and blood trickled from my mouth, leaving a metallic taste that was oddly satisfying. My right arm felt numb, while my left arm seemed mostly fine. My book lay just out of reach, next to my not-so-injured hand, but it was in tatters. Tears rolled down my face. Heroes didn't do this. What kind of heroes would they become? What kind of hero wouldn't stand up for themselves when bullied? I looked down, understanding why I hadn't fought back. I didn't want to hurt those I considered innocent. However, we could both agree on one thing. They weren't as innocent as we had thought. I leaned my head against the wall, too exhausted to move. Nobody was going to come for me. I placed my hand over my waist to cover the bruises on my stomach. This reminded me of a conversation we had earlier. Why not just end this miserable situation? There was hardly anything left for me. Staying here felt more like being imprisoned than attending a school for heroes. Couldn't they see when someone was in danger? Clearly not, especially when someone was struggling right under their noses. I gritted my teeth, contemplating the thought of ending it all. I wondered what would happen to those who cared for me. They'd probably be relieved, wouldn't they? One less burden for them to carry, especially my mother. Why did I have to be so negative? Did anyone want my life to be a constant struggle? It felt like I was already at rock bottom. What did anyone want from me? Silence answered my questions. After a moment, I felt something tugging at my mind. Panic surged as a dark cloud began to obscure my vision. It's all right. Just relax and I'll help you through this. You can rest while I take care of everything. My eyes grew heavy. I was skeptical, but what other choice did I have? I let myself drift off. The next day, The protagonist woke up still in their uniform, having not changed after the events of the previous day. BLD stained their clothes, but they felt indifferent. They went to the washroom and looked into the mirror, feeling a wave of self-disgust wash over them. Their normally green messy hair had taken on a darkened hue, and their eyes were puffy with dark bags underneath. Bandages adorned their face, remnants of the constant bullying at school. As they examined their reflection, they noticed a flicker in their eyes, shifting from bright green to a startling bright red. A chilling thought crossed their mind. They felt as if they looked like someone who had committed a crime. Looking down at their hands, they saw them covered in dried BLD, and an unsettling sense of satisfaction coursed through their veins. Deciding to return to the dorms, they hoped to avoid memories of their mother. Perhaps they could find 𝐾𝐿. A small smile appeared on their face, thinking it was Sunday and most UA students would be occupied elsewhere. However, they were mistaken. The horrified expressions of their classmates upon entering the building were unmistakable. They wore their uniform with a jacket hanging loosely off their shoulders, keeping their head down to evade the stares. A voice called out, accusing them of being a freak and a killer. The speaker rushed forward, but when their eyes met, the boy stumbled back in fear, a look of terror etched on his face. The protagonist couldn't help but let out a small giggle, smiling sweetly at him. The atmosphere shifted as other students recoiled under their gaze. A girl shouted "villain," and chaos ensued as students scrambled to escape the hallway. The protagonist giggled again, feeling a rush of exhilaration. They made their way to the dorms, taking the long route through the school. Upon entering, conversations ceased as their presence was felt. Kirishima and Mina were the first to approach. Kirishima asked if they were all right, while Mina gasped at the sight of the BLD. She rushed over, inspecting their arms and asking if they were hurt. A brief flashback of the previous day's events flooded their mind, bringing tears to their eyes. Mina embraced them and they sank to the ground, crying into her shirt. Kirishima quickly left the room, presumably to find help. Mina comforted them, whispering that everything would be okay. The protagonist glanced up to see Todoroki approaching. They pulled back from the hug, noticing some dried BLD had stained Mina's shirt, but it didn't matter. They asked where 𝐾𝐿 was, realizing the angry blonde was absent. Todoroki informed them that Kirishima had gone to find him. The protagonist suggested they join the search, and Todoroki agreed. Mina helped them up, her enthusiasm lifting their spirits as she exclaimed they should find the angry Pomeranian, eliciting a laugh from the protagonist. They ran through the school, but 𝐾𝐿 seemed nowhere to be found. Eventually, they regrouped with Kirishima, who had also been unsuccessful in locating him. The two decided to return to the dorms and wait, while the protagonist opted to continue searching alone. Wandering through the different floors, they heard familiar laughter and quickly ducked into an empty classroom near the roof. Pressing their ear against the door, they listened to the students chatting. It was disheartening to hear them mock the sports festival champion, claiming he was easy to defeat now, while others spoke of the protagonist with fear, comparing them to a psychopath and labeling them a villain. The chatter faded as footsteps echoed down the hallway toward the stairs. The protagonist peeked out to find the corridor empty and swiftly darted up the stairs in the direction from which the footsteps had come. They hoped 𝐾𝐿 was all right. I ran up the stairs, my legs feeling shaky about what I might find at the top. How is that helpful? I tripped on the last step but regained my footing immediately, the jacket around my shoulders slipping away. I quickly rushed toward the place I knew they had been, an empty classroom at the far side of the school. There, 𝐾𝐿 emerged, looking frustrated and injured. 𝐾𝐿 didn't look up or respond as I approached him. Concern filled my voice as I asked if he needed help. I noticed his arms were bleeding and wondered if that was how he had been brought down. With his injuries, he couldn't effectively use his quirk. I pleaded for him to answer me. He let out an irritated noise and continued to limp down the stairs, leaving small droplets of BLD behind. I watched him for a moment before running to him again, positioning myself in front of him to make him stop. 𝐾𝐿 didn't acknowledge me. I gripped his shoulders and shook him lightly, urging him to say something. Silence hung in the air, and my impatience grew as I shook him harder, asking why he was ignoring me. He pushed me away, and I stumbled to the ground, feeling a sharp pain in my shoulder where he had touched me. I looked at my uniform, noticing a small scorch mark. It would leave a minor burn, but I hoped it would heal. Tears filled my eyes as I looked up at him. He told me to go away, calling me useless. I felt a wave of despair wash over me. It seemed I was unwanted by everyone. 𝐾𝐿 didn't want to see me, and my mom and All Might were gone. I burst into tears, realizing he hadn't even noticed I was covered in BLD Izuku. There is a way out of this, you know. I laughed bitterly, wondering if there was truly a way out of this situation. Did you just swear? I frowned and shifted into a proper sitting position, an idea forming in my mind. With a smile, I got up and walked toward the stairs. There was a secret staircase hidden in one of the janitor's rooms that led to the top of the building. It was designed for cleaning the roof, and not everyone knew about it since it was rather dangerous with no railings to prevent accidents. I made my way to the top of UA, the glass below me spotless except for a few spots from a seagull. I looked toward the rising sun. It was appealing. Sitting at the edge, I dangled my legs, captivated by the sight. Are you sure you want to do this? I can't stop you, but you might have to endure all the abuse and hatred, never becoming the #1 hero because of those who look down on you. I sighed, acknowledging the truth in those words. It's an appealing sight, isn't it? All Might. A wave of sadness washed over me, and I felt a strange sense of clarity. Goodbye, 𝐾𝐿. I'll be going with Mom now. With that, I stood up, unaware of the footsteps rushing behind me. When I turned around, I saw 𝐾𝐿, his face filled with panic. DKU. Get away from the ledge. He yelled, but his injuries prevented him from reaching me in time. Other students who had been in the dorms earlier followed, horror etched on their faces. I smiled one last time, feeling a sense of peace. I'm just going to say hi to Mom and All Might. I'll see you soon. Then I fell backward, the screams of my classmates echoing around me. As I plummeted, the wind whipped past me, and I heard shouts from students outside. Suddenly, I slowed down, confused as I saw a group of students piled together, one hand reaching toward me. But as they fell, I continued my descent. At this point, I might actually survive. Darkness enveloped me as I hit the ground. I felt no pain, only a peaceful silence. Izuku lay on the pavement, his eyes closed, with BLD seeping from his wounds. The teachers pushed through the crowd that had gathered, some blocking the entrance intentionally. Aizawa was the first to reach Izuku, falling to his knees beside him. Students who had been piling on someone were scolded and threatened. The person who had been attacked got up from the ground, tears brimming in her eyes as she saw Izuku's condition. She had black hair with streaks of red, and her magenta eyes were filled with sorrow and regret. She ran off, shoving past the other students. Aizawa quickly scooped Izuku into his arms after checking for a pulse. He called out to present Mike, stating that Izuku was still alive and they needed to get him to a hospital. Some students expressed disappointment at this news and quickly left. At the hospital, Izuku was taken to the emergency room and into a surgical room. Bakugo had followed Aizawa, along with some other students and teachers. After about an hour, a nurse informed them that they were fortunate to have brought him in on time. Any longer and it could have been too late. Aizawa mentioned the young lady who had black hair and purple eyes, suggesting they inform her of Izuku's condition. The nurse nodded in agreement. Bakugo stood with them, having received a checkup for his own injuries, which left him covered in bandages and with a sprained arm in a sling. He appeared on the verge of tears, whispering to himself about feeling responsible for everything that had happened. The nurse walked away to attend to other patients, prompting Aizawa to suggest they inform the others waiting in the area. Bakugo nodded and followed him. In the waiting area, Kirishima, Mina, Uraraka, Azui, Ida, and Shoto were present. Kirishima and Mina were visibly upset, while Azui and Uraraka were watching the news. The report about a UA student attempting to take his own life had spread, though they did not reveal his identity, only stating that he was in critical condition. Shoto and Ida remained relatively calm until Ida began to break down, expressing regret for not being there for Izuku. Aizawa asked about the other students who had been involved, learning they were outside as the nurses had limited the number of visitors in the waiting room. He sighed, suggesting they go home and wait until Izuku woke up, as it was already dark outside. Everyone but Bakugo and Shoto agreed. Aizawa reminded them to call him Eraserhead outside of school and left the room, some students following him. Bakugo and Shoto stayed behind. Shoto asked if Bakugo was going to leave, but Bakugo turned and walked back toward the hallway he had been in earlier, with Shoto following. Bakugo, frustrated, snapped at Shoto, insisting he didn't understand anything about Izuku. He accused Shoto of only being there because Izuku had helped him with his own issues. Shoto winced, choosing to remain silent rather than escalate the situation. Bakugo stormed off down the hall, leaving Shoto to sigh and walk away, deciding not to visit Izuku, who was just a few floors up. 2 days later, class had started, and Aizawa was late. He dragged his sleeping bag behind him like a child with a favorite blanket. Upon entering the classroom, silence fell over the students. Most seemed fine, except for a few like Ida and Ochako, and Bakugo, who looked particularly distressed. Aizawa felt a pang of sympathy for Bakugo, knowing his childhood friend had almost died. He had come to respect Bakugo as a student, treating him and his classmates like his own children, despite not having any. Shaking off his thoughts, he announced that they would be taking a test that day, which elicited groans from the class. He explained they would be testing their quirks to see if they had improved, similar to their training camp experience but with fewer disasters. After instructing them to change into their PE clothes, Aizawa left the classroom. Halfway to the field, he received a call from the hospital. When he answered, the calm voice of the nurse from before greeted him. She informed him that, while Izuku was not dead, he was in a coma. Aizawa struggled to process the news, feeling unprepared for such a situation. The nurse explained that it seemed Izuku had sustained serious injuries, leaving Aizawa to contemplate the weight of the situation as he gazed out the window at the school. I don't know how to explain it. His emotions are pulling him deeper into sleep, to the point where he has fallen into a coma. It's a critical situation, and if this continues, the outcome could be dire. She trailed off, not wanting to voice her fears. As I approached the door leading to the field, I noticed that most of the students were already outside. I paused for a moment, gathering my thoughts before responding. I expressed my gratitude for the information and hoped she could continue to do her best to help him. With that, I ended the call, not waiting for a reply. As I walked out and put my phone away, the students noticed my demeanor. Todoroki was the first to speak up, asking if the hospital had called. I confirmed that they had news about Midoriya's condition. The class buzzed with excitement and concern. Ochako, her voice a mix of worry and eagerness, asked what they had said. I averted my gaze and warned them that it was best not to know, only revealing that he wouldn't be waking up anytime soon. Tears brimmed in Ochako's eyes as she fell against Ida, who was trying to support her. The rest of the class arrived, a quiet murmur spreading among them. I gathered their attention and declared it was time to begin. After classes, the group decided to visit Izuku. This group included Kiri, Mina, Uraraka, Ida, Azui, Shinso, Shoto, Bakugo, and the girl who had saved him, 𝐼𝐼𝐻𝐼. Her quirk allowed her to control the atoms of living creatures, similar to Shinso's power, but she could activate it on anyone she saw. She could also speed up healing and enhance her abilities, though it required intense concentration and years of training to master. Another perk of her quirk was her ability to use X-ray vision. As they made their way to the hospital, Bakugo typically ignored everyone around him, only grunting a brief thank you to Kurai. Upon arriving at the hospital, they found Izuku in the ICU, and the news they received was shocking. The doctor informed them that he still had a few broken bones, but fortunately, he had not sustained too much damage due to his slow fall. However, a vein in his eye had ruptured from the impact. Other than that and his current state, he should be fine, unless he didn't wake up. The group nodded in understanding, with Kurai and Ochako in tears while Azui remained optimistic, assuring everyone that he would be all right. The doctor inquired if they had informed his parents, and they exchanged glances. Ochako admitted that only Bakugo had the address and number. Bakugo felt a surge of frustration at being the one to deliver the bad news. He picked up his phone and stepped into a private room, quickly dialing the number and waiting for someone to answer. A male voice responded, and 𝐾𝐿 was taken aback. He questioned who it was and why they had Mrs. Midoriya's phone. The voice revealed that 𝐒𝐮𝐬 Midoriya was dead. 𝐾𝐿's eyes widened in shock, a new pain filling his chest as guilt washed over him. He struggled to comprehend how this could have happened. When he asked for details, the voice replied that they could not share more at that moment. Overwhelmed with emotion, 𝐾𝐿 threw his phone against the wall, the impact loud enough to alert those outside. He felt a mix of pity and guilt, tears spilling from his eyes as he berated himself. He shouted in frustration, feeling the weight of his emotions. Kirishima rushed in, asking what was wrong. 𝐾𝐿 quickly wiped his tears and dismissed the concern, claiming it didn't matter. Kirishima then asked how the other person had reacted, but 𝐾𝐿 walked past him, leaving the room without a word. Kirishima followed, picking up the cracked phone on his way out. Outside, the group was either sitting on a small bench next to the room or standing around, seemingly lost in thought. Shoto asked 𝐾𝐿 how it went, but 𝐾𝐿 retorted, questioning why he wanted to know. Iida interjected, reminding 𝐾𝐿 that it was rude to dismiss Shoto's inquiry. Kurai chimed in, suggesting that it was a private matter, but Iida insisted that 𝐾𝐿 could have responded differently. Meanwhile, in the depths of his mind, Izuku wondered where he was. It felt like he had been trapped in darkness for days, unsure of what was happening in the real world. He had hoped to be dead, but now all he wanted was to escape this void. Occasionally he heard voices and glimpsed rays of light, but each time he tried to reach them, he sank deeper into the darkness. A hushed voice commented on how remarkable it was that he was still alive. Another voice, male this time, expressed uncertainty about how much longer he could keep lying to his friends. The first voice mentioned that Izuku had experienced a miracle, but the chances of survival were slim. The doctor confessed he was hesitant to continue, fearing he couldn't bear to lose another patient. Izuku realized he was on the brink of death. The voices indicated that if he continued to sink into darkness, he would be lost. He looked around, but there was nothing to see. He asked where they were, and the voice responded, suggesting they could meet now. He saw another ray of light and asked how he could escape. The voice explained that it was easy, but he needed to be in the right mindset. He had to imagine this as a dream, allowing himself to float. He realized he was in his own mind, where he could defy the laws of reality. He closed his eyes tightly, focusing on the task at hand. After a moment, he understood that he had to believe he could do anything to move. With determination, he concentrated and imagined himself walking through the abyss. Feeling a slight shift, then more movement followed. It would take a while to reach the surface since he was so deep in his mind. Patience was key. Getting lost in this landscape could mean he wouldn't be able to leave. He wondered what that meant but received no response. He urged himself to keep going, determined to push through. After what felt like an hour, he encouraged himself to keep moving, imagining himself running through the darkness, getting closer to the light that would bring him back. A female voice suddenly broke through his thoughts, louder than before, signaling he was nearing the surface. A male voice confirmed that his heart rate was increasing. He froze, confusion washing over him. Then he envisioned two figures in front of him, his body awakening. With a start, he opened his eyes. He croaked out a sound, and the doctors smiled at him. They welcomed him back, expressing relief that he had returned. One of them mentioned that they had almost lost him. The girl got up and left the room, and he heard relieved sighs and happy exclamations from outside. The doctor removed the oxygen mask from his face. Looking around, he realized he was in a hospital, which made sense after jumping off a building. The room was dark, nearly pitch black, with no stars or moon visible from his angle. The doctor informed him he had been there for a few days and was now healed. After a bit of food and rest, he would be free to go. He didn't respond, feeling a sense of something missing, as if he were forgetting something important. About half an hour later, he was told he had visitors outside. Curious, he asked who they were, but the nurse only smiled and opened the door for him. On the other side stood someone he hadn't expected. He gasped, tears welling in his eyes. His mother was there. Meanwhile, in the waiting area, The nurse who had been with him rushed out toward the lobby, drawing the attention of his friends. Bakugo stood up, demanding to know what had happened. The nurse and another doctor rushed into Izuku's room, locking the door behind them. Everyone else stood up, concern etched on their faces. Azui, visibly worried, asked what might be happening inside. Ida suggested they hope for the best for Midoriya, while Shoto agreed, emphasizing their inability to do anything but wait. Bakugo clenched his fists, frustration evident as he abruptly turned and left, heading toward the entrance. Mina and Kirishima chased after him, calling his name. Kurai stood up, trembling as she approached the door, muttering that maybe she could help. Ida stopped her, explaining that they didn't know what was happening and it was best to stay put. She shook her head, insisting her quirk could help him. Shinso questioned how she could do that, and Kurai explained she might be able to sense what was happening and assist him. Uraraka agreed it was worth a shot, and even Shoto, though hesitant, acknowledged that they should try. Kurai, determined, approached the door and knocked. Everyone sighed at the formality of it all. Shoto stepped forward to open the door just as the nurse emerged, her expression panicked. Kurai quickly stepped closer, pleading to be let in to help. The nurse glanced back at the frantic doctors inside, one preparing a defibrillator. The machines around Izuku were beeping loudly. The nurse nodded, urging her to come in quickly. Kurai ran inside, followed by the others. One of the doctors turned to them, but the nurse insisted it might be Izuku's only chance. Kurai rushed to Izuku's side, hesitantly reaching out to him. She placed her hand on his forehead and closed her eyes, silently urging him to wake up. In her mind, she screamed for him to listen to the signs, to understand that the world he was in wasn't real. She focused her energy, trying to reprogram an atom in his brain to reverse the process. Sweat dripped down her face as she concentrated, desperate to reach him. Suddenly, Bakugo burst into the room, his anger and worry palpable. Kurai continued her efforts, urging Izuku to wake up for the sake of his friends who were counting on him. She sensed movement in the atom she had altered, noticing another large black one nearby. She hoped that whatever was happening would lead him back to them. That strange realization struck. The entity Izuku was connected to was someone with him. She sighed in relief, knowing he would likely survive. Just as she was about to inform the others, an explosion rocked the side of the room. With Izuku now, they were almost out of the hospital when his mother shivered, a streak of purple flashing around her. Concerned, he reached out to her, asking if she was okay. She assured him she was fine, but something felt off. Should they ask the doctor to check on her? An odd feeling lingered, as if someone was meant to respond. As they continued walking, an unsettling claustrophobia crept in. The dim lights cast an eerie atmosphere, and there seemed to be no signs of life outside. To his surprise, 𝐾𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐵 appeared to be glowing, a light shade of magenta. That was definitely unusual. Was it the lighting, or was something more happening? They reached the exit, where a pitch-black car awaited. 𝐾𝐮𝐦𝐴 turned to face him, her glow illuminating the darkness around them. Izuku blinked in confusion, sensing something was amiss. Everything was black, with no lights except for his mother and the dim lights of the hospital, which also appeared dark. The sky was devoid of moon and stars, and there were no clouds in sight. Tears began to fall from 𝐾𝐮𝐦𝐴's eyes as she spoke to him. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach, unsure of what she meant when she said he needed to choose whether to come with her. He was taken aback, insisting he would go with her, but she urged him to think carefully. She reminded him of his friends waiting for him to wake up and warned that if he followed her, he wouldn't see them again. Overwhelmed, he hugged her tightly, tears streaming down his face as he expressed his reluctance to leave her. 𝐾𝐮𝐦𝐴 reassured him that she would always be there, waiting for him when the time was right. After one last embrace, he stepped back, tears still falling, but he forced a smile and declared his intention to play with Kaken and the others. 𝐾𝐮𝐦𝐴 nodded, telling him to be careful. Then, she faded away into a purple fog, taking the surrounding darkness with her. He quickly turned and ran toward the hospital, determined to reach his room. The ground beneath him began to vanish, revealing a black abyss. If he fell, he would have to start over, and they would think he had died. He pushed forward, the space around him growing more difficult to navigate. He focused on the light ahead, running faster as he saw a blinding white glow coming from the room where he had awoken. He reached it just before the darkness could consume him, glancing back to see the light magenta colors slowing the encroaching shadows. Thank you. With renewed determination, he leapt into the light. In the outside world, dust filled the air. The doctors and most of the students were nowhere to be found. 𝐼𝐻𝐬 had been knocked out in the explosion, having taken most of the impact for Izuku, leaving him relatively unharmed except for a few scratches. The wall facing outside had been destroyed in the blast. 𝐒𝐻𝐬, positioned farthest away, remained conscious but was trapped beneath a large piece of rock that had fallen on him, preventing movement without causing harm to his classmates. Frustration boiled within him as he attempted to use his quirk to dislodge the debris but hesitated, knowing it could hurt someone if it shattered. Mina and Kirishima had been blasted out of the room by the explosion's force. While Mina lay unconscious, Kirishima had instinctively hardened and remained unharmed. He slowly got to his feet, struggling to see through the dust cloud. Then, the conscious individuals heard a voice. A deep voice urged urgency, indicating they didn't have much time before the pro-heroes arrived. Through the dust, a dark figure approached Izuku, lifting him in a bridal carry and moving toward the open space in the wall. Kirishima charged, attempting to be stealthy, but the villain dodged, leaping from the building and disappearing into a portal. Frustrated, Kirishima yelled in anger, while 𝐒𝐻𝐬, still trapped, felt a surge of rage. He disintegrated the rock, pinning him down, cursing himself for not acting sooner. He got up and rushed to the edge where Kirishima was peering down, vowing to get Izuku back, no matter the cost. In Izuku's perspective, he felt himself being lifted by strong arms, a sudden drop causing his stomach to lurch. Though he hadn't fully regained consciousness, he sensed a feeling of pride within him, knowing he could escape if he wanted to, no matter the obstacles. After a moment, he heard voices around him. One voice exclaimed excitement over his condition, while another, a darker voice, questioned why they wanted him. The raspy voice mentioned a message sent through telepathy. They noted that he seemed lifeless, which made him twitch in response. The female voice continued, demanding to have his BLD, while the man holding him commented on the nickname she had given him. Their banter continued, but Izuku remained focused, determined to find a way out of this situation. Shigi got a new nickname. The guy, likely Shigaraki, insisted that they take the child to the torture room. He commented that it looked strange for 𝗂𝐷𝐵 to be holding him in front of everyone, as if he were a prince in shining armor. 𝗂𝐵𝐵 questioned the need for the torture room, expressing uncertainty about the child's condition, noting that they had pulled him from the brink of death. Shigaraki dismissed his concerns, emphasizing the importance of ensuring the child didn't escape if he was still alive. The child reflected on how close he had been to death, recalling a warning he had received about falling into a dream. He felt the cold surface beneath him, causing a slight shiver. A hot breath brushed against his face, carrying a scent reminiscent of cinnamon. He felt something cold wrap around his wrists and ankles, prompting a whimper from him due to the chill. Footsteps echoed in the room, and he felt someone lift him into a sitting position, wrapping something warm around him. As he settled back down, the warmth enveloped his arms and legs. 𝗂𝐵𝐵's voice broke through, questioning what he was doing. The child managed to stammer a thank you, followed by a loud thump and a startled exclamation from 𝗂𝐵𝐵, who seemed to have bumped into something. Time passed as he lay there, occasionally hearing footsteps and quiet chatter outside. Eventually, he opened his eyes and realized he was lying on a table, illuminated by dim lights. Surprisingly, instead of fear, he felt a rush of excitement, though he couldn't quite understand why. Suddenly, the door swung open, and several figures entered the room: Shigaraki, Kurojirai, Toga, and 𝗂𝐵𝐵. Shigaraki approached the table, questioning whether the child was alive. 𝗂𝐵𝐵 retorted, suggesting Shigaraki check for himself. Toga erupted into laughter, and Kurojirai proposed checking the child's temperature. 𝗂𝐵𝐵 insisted he had already confirmed the child was alive. The child decided to speak up, opening his eyes and addressing Shigaraki directly, which startled him. 𝗂𝐵𝐵 laughed heartily, while Toga cheered in delight at the child's awakening. The child recognized Kurojirai from previous encounters, recalling their names from battles and news reports. He felt oddly calm, reasoning that death was not the worst outcome, as it had once been his goal. He asked why they had brought him there, and Toga, excited, inquired if he was happy to see them. She joked about his jump from UA, and he questioned what they intended to do with him, expressing feelings of worthlessness. The room fell silent, and he noticed the surprised and horrified expressions on their faces, which oddly pleased him. Toga looked around, while 𝗀𝗶𝐻𝗸 expressed his discontent with the situation. Kurojirai suggested they discuss their plans outside, away from their guest. Shigaraki ordered Toga and 𝗀𝗶𝐻𝗸 to stay and guard him, warning them not to underestimate the child, reminding them of his previous victory over Overhaul. Once Shigaraki and Kurojirai left, 𝗀𝗶𝐻𝗸 crossed his arms, leaning against the wall, while Toga bounced with excitement, eager to talk to the child. The child observed their dynamic, noting how they seemed to act like siblings. He pondered their relationship, considering whether they would protect one another or sacrifice each other for their own safety. As he muttered his thoughts aloud, he realized he had spoken out loud, prompting a sigh from him. 𝗀𝗶𝐻𝗸 asked if that was something I normally did. I frowned and explained that it was a habit I had developed from studying heroes, and it surfaced when I was deep in thought. Toga squealed, declaring that it was one of the nicest things someone had said about us. 𝗀𝗶𝐻𝗸 praised the idea of studying heroes, noting its usefulness in terms of skill, combatability, and intelligence. I felt flustered, butterflies erupting in my stomach at his words. I hesitated, admitting that everyone thought I was weird for my habits. 𝗀𝗶𝐻𝗸 nodded, saying that if he had that kind of skill, he doubted he would even be here. Toga playfully punched his arm, reminding him that his foolishness was why he was with us. I couldn't help but laugh at that. I mused aloud about being with a bunch of idiots because of my own stupidity, to which Toga enthusiastically agreed. I pointed out that Toga was actually quite clever in combat and had managed to evade capture for her actions. She protested, claiming she was not an idiot. 𝗀𝗶𝐻𝗸 told her to calm down, waving his hands dismissively. Toga insisted she wasn't crazy, and he chuckled, calling her a crazy person. I laughed, remarking that they really did act like siblings. Their sudden silence caught my attention. 𝗀𝗶𝐻𝗸's expression had turned cold, while Toga looked sad. I felt a pang of guilt and asked if I had touched on a sensitive topic, recalling my own family troubles. It seemed we had more in common than I initially thought. Toga smiled, saying it was all in the past. She then asked if she could have some of my BLD, liking her lips and pulling out a knife. I raised an eyebrow, curious about what would happen if I refused. She hesitated, admitting that if I said no, she wouldn't take it. I pointed out that I hadn't said she couldn't, and 𝗀𝗶𝐻𝗸 looked at me as if I were crazy. Toga squealed again, reminding me not to take too much BLD. I wondered what I was trying to accomplish, getting them to trust me, perhaps. It seemed I would be here for a while, so getting to know them could be beneficial. Toga then carefully sliced my forearm, and I watched as BLD began to drip. My stomach growled, and she quickly dabbed the cut with a towel, absorbing the BLD. She produced a vial and squeezed the towel, letting the BLD drip into it, her tongue sticking out in anticipation. I felt a pang of hunger. Toga then wrapped a piece of the blanket around my arm to stop the bleeding. She danced in a circle, pleased with her collection. 𝗀𝗶𝐻𝗸 remarked that it was unusual for someone to willingly give BLD, especially to someone as unpredictable as Toga. She countered that I was nice, unlike him, and claimed my BLD tasted better than his, which she described as sour. 𝗀𝗶𝐻𝗸 sarcastically asserted that his BLD tasted better than anyone else's. I suggested that taste could depend on a person's character, with sweetness indicating kindness and bitterness suggesting meanness. Toga excitedly proposed that I become her BLD partner, causing 𝗀𝗶𝐻𝗸 to cover his ears from her loudness. I laughed, thinking she sounded like a character from a story. She glared at 𝗀𝗶𝐻𝗸, demanding to know why he kept mentioning secret love children. I corrected her, but she insisted on her wording, shrieking in her playful manner. Just then, the door opened again, and Toga greeted twice enthusiastically. He did a small fist pump but then remarked that the atmosphere felt like a funeral. 𝗀𝗶𝐻𝗸 sighed, asking twice if he had been sent to SW places with Toga. Twice explained that he was bored and wanted to talk to his friends, gesturing to Toga. He complained about the lack of social interaction outside, his voice deepening as he spoke. Toga suggested that he keep busy by fetching her a cup of BLD from her hidden stash. Twice tilted his head, considering her request before giving a thumbs up and leaving. The door slammed shut, echoing in the room, and dust billowed up. Silence fell, and I noticed Toga had nothing left to say as she sat down at a small table in the corner. 𝗂𝐷𝐵 leaned against the wall, looking like he might fall asleep. I took in my surroundings, which resembled a surgical room. After a moment, I heard Toga gasp softly and approach 𝗂𝐵, whispering something in his ear. I caught snippets of their conversation, including the words cuffs and quirk. 𝗂𝐵's eyes widened, and he glanced back at me, shaking his head. He admitted he had forgotten something important, and Toga wondered if I knew. 𝗂𝐵 doubted I was aware, expressing disbelief at forgetting such a crucial detail. Toga suggested they could put the cuffs on me now. I glanced at my wrists and ankles, which were chained to the table with regular metal cuffs. I frowned, realizing they hadn't used quirk-canceling cuffs. I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. I looked up at the ceiling, contemplating my situation. It was better here than out there, where they likely thought I was dead. A twinge of guilt washed over me, knowing they might be blaming themselves for my predicament. I shook off the thought, sighing as I struggled against the chains. It was taking a long time for Shigaraki to have a talk with his partner. Suddenly, someone shook me awake. Blinking, I realized I had fallen asleep. I found myself sitting in a metal chair in a plain room, different from the one I had been in earlier. My hands were tied behind my back, and my feet were bound together. Twisting my head, I tried to get a look at my restrained hands. Quirk-canceling cuffs were now on me, and I couldn't help but grin at that. Shigaraki's raspy voice broke the silence, announcing that I was finally awake. I stared at him as he leaned against the wall, his odd hand covering his face. He seemed to cringe at my question about whether he normally watched people sleep. He insisted that while he was a villain, he was not a creep. I retorted that from what I had seen so far, he might as well be one, knowing full well the consequences of provoking him. Quiet laughter came from behind me, likely from his group mates. Whatever they planned to do with me, I felt powerless to stop them. I glanced back at Shigaraki, who was now scratching his neck, his jaw clenched. A familiar voice piped up, asking if they could have more of my BLD. Shigaraki responded, questioning why they needed more when they had just received a whole vial. His irritation was evident as he complained about his companion's antics. I couldn't help but comment on Shigaraki's demeanor, suggesting he was like the baby of the group. Suddenly, he was right in front of me, a cold hand wrapped around my neck. I frowned, noting how uncomfortable his rough hands felt against my skin. He leaned closer, tightening his grip, and hissed that he could kill me in an instant if all 5 of his fingers touched my neck. I stuck out my tongue defiantly, and he released me, annoyance clear on his face. Shigaraki expressed frustration about why their 𝗂𝐼𝐴 wanted me, claiming I annoyed him. Another voice chimed in, explaining my importance as a student in Class 1A and someone who had worked closely with All Might. I leaned back in my chair, bored, and questioned whether they planned to torture me or broadcast my suffering to the world. I mused that it would be interesting to see people's reactions, especially the delight from some. One of the voices, whom I thought was Twice, remarked that I made it sound like they were monsters. I paused before pointing out that they were indeed villains, as I had been taught throughout my life. I suggested they were simply people with tragic backstories seeking revenge or a way to cope. Turning my attention back to Shigaraki, I asked what they intended to do with me. He tilted his head slightly, revealing that their instructions were to capture me, but the message had been cut short. They were keeping me there for now since they didn't know what to do next. I furrowed my brow, asking if that meant I was staying. He grunted, telling me not to whine like a baby, insisting they weren't happy about my presence either. I blinked, clarifying that I never said I didn't want to stay. Shigaraki seemed taken aback, sputtering in confusion. I turned away, noting that I had nowhere else to go. An unsettling silence filled the room as I felt his gaze on me, unyielding and intense. In the background, Toga suggested I could stay in 𝗂𝐵H's room since it was larger and fairer. Another voice questioned how they could trust me not to escape and inform the heroes of their location. Another raspy voice chimed in, suggesting that if they kept me, I would need to be confined to a dungeon or torture room. However, the voice continued, referencing Steign's belief that I was worthy of being a hero and that I shouldn't be harmed. Shigaraki sighed, concluding that the best option was to place me in 𝗂𝐵H's room. He outlined the reasoning. It was one of the largest rooms, I wouldn't have to worry about his quirk at night, and it was payback for something I had done. He raised his middle finger, a smirk visible on his face. Toga shrieked about inappropriate language in front of me, and 𝗂𝐵H grumbled in response. Suddenly, my world went black, and I felt a sharp pain at the back of my head. When I awoke, I found myself lying on a comfortable bed. Looking around the dark room, I noticed light seeping from beneath what appeared to be a metal door. I slowly sat up, struggling to see anything in the dimness. It was night outside, which explained the absence of light filtering through the window above. The curtains were pulled aside, revealing metal bars. The realization that they didn't trust him made him wrinkle his nose in annoyance. Turning away from the window, he took in the room. It was surprisingly large compared to his dorm, but it felt bare. A small desk held a pile of clothes, and next to it was another door with a clothing hook, likely the bathroom. A cabinet beside the bed was covered in locks, suggesting they didn't want him taking anything. Quiet chatter drifted from outside, shadows blocking some of the light entering the room. He tensed as the door swung open. Toga's voice rang out, playful yet insistent, while 𝗂𝐵H's response was curt and dismissive. The dark figure stepped into the room, slamming the door behind him. Toga complained about being hit by the door, her voice muffled. 𝗂𝐵H muttered something under his breath, glancing at him before returning his gaze. 𝗂𝐵H's eyes widened as he stared, and he shifted uncomfortably, feeling the awkwardness in the air. He managed a hesitant greeting, unsure of what to say. 𝗂𝐵H's expression was serious, and he acknowledged that he was awake with a narrowed gaze. Not wanting to provoke him, he nodded silently. 𝗂𝐵H sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair, muttering something inaudible. The silence felt heavy, and he struggled with the urge to break it. What could he say? Compliment the room. Ask about villain hobbies. It felt strange to even consider. He pondered the nature of villains, realizing they were just people who had made poor choices. Perhaps they could change just as he hoped to. Yet doubt crept in. He felt like a failure, someone who had hurt his friends and lost the chance to be a hero. The weight of that realization was heavy. Suddenly, he felt a light tap on his head, and he yelped in surprise. 𝗂𝐵H looked at him with a mix of sympathy and concern, emotions he found difficult to interpret. Embarrassment washed over him as he wondered if he had been mumbling again. 𝗂𝐵H shook his head, seemingly contemplating his next words. He sat on the bed beside him, prompting him to scoot away instinctively. 𝗂𝐵H glanced at him, then spoke, assuring him that he wasn't to blame for the death of the symbol of peace. He encouraged him to ignore the negativity from others and to prove them wrong. Surprised by 𝗂𝐵H's unexpected kindness, he expressed his gratitude. 𝗂𝐵H, momentarily confused, nodded before standing up and leaving the room, casting one last glance back before closing the door, plunging the room into darkness. He lay back on the bed, feeling drained and in need of recovery from the recent events. Closing his eyes, he drifted back into a dream only to find himself in a nightmare. Meanwhile, outside, the students of Class 1A were in shock. The recent events had left them reeling. First, All Might, then one of their friends attempting to jump from a building, and now the League had taken a body. Bakugo had become deeply withdrawn, surpassing even Tokoyami and Shinso in his somber demeanor. The Baku squad was struggling as well. Mina and Kirishima looked exhausted, while Denki's eyes were puffy from crying. Zero hadn't been seen since Midoriya was taken. The Deku squad was not faring any better. Uraraka had become timid, barely paying attention in class, while Ida had grown stricter, often irritating his classmates. Azui remained herself but seemed much sadder. Shoto had changed dramatically, becoming rigid and only speaking when necessary, often snapping at others. He and Bakugo spent more time together, while the rest of the class kept to themselves, avoiding interaction with other UA students. 𝐼𝐻𝐻, or Mr. Izuku, was facing blame for the situation, and he was visibly affected, looking worse than usual but also more alert, as if he believed he could have prevented what happened. The reputation of UA had plummeted, with the public aware of the class involved but little else. The shame weighed heavily on the teachers and students, who were viewed as villains. They argued with the public, insisting that they were not to blame for the tragedy, but this only worsened their standing. UA had become the most unpopular hero school. 𝗏𝐾𝐽 received special attention following the incident, with concerns that he might attempt something similar. He remained at the dorms almost permanently, always accompanied by guards or teachers. He had become quiet, lacking his usual fiery spirit, his eyes now a dull shade of red, reflecting the turmoil within. His hair was down, less spiky than it had once been, though not everyone could tell since he always wore a hoodie. Todoroki, with his hot and cold quirk, was in a similar state. He maintained his usual demeanor, though there were occasional annoyed expressions and some low growls. 𝗏𝐾𝐽 seemed nearly untouchable, only his classmates saw him, and when they weren't around, he vanished. There was a rumor that the police were questioning him about Izuku, as he was one of Izuku's closest friends. Many were left wondering whether Izuku was still alive. Izuku walked into the classroom, looking more fatigued than usual, yet somehow hyper-aware, as if he had consumed a lot of coffee. The class sat quietly, choosing not to chat at the start of the day. He sighed as he observed his students. He announced that they would be patrolling the city as a class, with everyone partnered up in groups of 4. He glanced at the sheet in his hands and mentioned that a new student would be joining them temporarily, depending on whether he returned. A low murmur spread through the room. No one wanted someone else to take the place of their once cheerful friend. Izuku then walked out of the classroom, instructing them to get their suits and leave immediately. The class complied quickly, except for one ash-blonde student who remained seated, resting his head on the table. He thought about Izuku, hoping he was all right. The class was divided into groups, each assigned to patrol a specific area of the city to look for any suspicious activity and report back. There were 5 groups of 4. The new student, Kurai Iroh, was suspected to have been assigned on purpose, as she had been one of the few kind individuals before the incident with their classmate. 𝗏𝐾𝐽's group included Mina, Kirishima, and Kurai. They were patrolling a less populated area filled with abandoned warehouses. 𝗏𝐾𝐽 snorted, irritated by the cheerful chatter from Kirishima and Mina, while Kurai annoyed him with her silence and frequent sidelong glances. He thought to himself that she believed she was better than him. Gritting his teeth, he glared into the dark alleyways. Kurai hesitantly addressed him, asking if he was Bakugo Katsuki. He turned his glare toward her, feeling the tension in the air. He snarled, asking what she wanted. She winced and hesitantly inquired if he could share more about Izuku. He stared at her, and when she added that it wasn't too much to ask, she yelped as his glare intensified, his eyes seeming to blaze with intensity. He simply replied no. She smiled and nodded in understanding, and he grunted, quickening his pace while the 2 chatterboxes behind him continued their animated conversation. Kirishima suggested they check out an alley, mentioning that Kurai had seen something. Kurai confirmed that there were multiple figures standing nearby, though she wasn't sure what they were doing, only that their mouth area felt unusually warm. Mina and Kirishima exchanged glances in surprise. Mina asked if she could sense all that, to which Kurai nodded, explaining that it was part of her quirk, enabling her to feel other living beings around her when it was activated. Kirishima found it fascinating, but Kurai admitted it could be overwhelming if there were too many entities nearby. 𝗏𝐾𝐽 snorted and marched ahead into the alleyway, prompting them to follow quickly. The darkness enveloped them, and the acrid smell of smoke filled the air. As they crept through the shadows, they could hear soft mumbling and the occasional harsh laughter. One voice remarked on how foolish heroes were to think they ruled the world, mentioning a rumor about the League acquiring a new powerful asset, possibly a new Nomu. The mention of a UA student sent a chill through the young heroes, and Kurai felt the anger and pain radiating from 𝗏𝐾𝐽, who seemed ready to explode at any moment. Kurai, not knowing telepathy, hoped her quirk would keep their cover intact. She activated something in 𝗏𝐾𝐽's mind, 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐩𝐃𝐞� his pineal gland to produce melatonin at an accelerated rate. She noticed him beginning to slouch and smiled slightly to herself. Moments later, she grabbed his shoulders and quietly pulled him back, his body relaxing in her grip. Mina and Kirishima looked on in surprise as she instructed them to hold him while they dragged him out of the alley. Turning back, they found themselves face to face with one of the men lurking in the corner. He leered at her, questioning what a girl like her was doing there. She stammered, feeling sweat bead on her forehead as she noticed more men behind him, all looking menacing. She regretted not leaving this to the professionals. Panicking, she blurted out that she was just passing by and needed to go, apologizing for bothering them. As she attempted to flee, another man emerged from the shadows, blocking her path. He leaned down to her eye level, suggesting she had overheard too much. She swallowed hard, hoping her friends wouldn't come to her aid but instead warn Izuku. In the background, muffled protests from Mina and Kirishima reached her ears. She closed her eyes in resignation. Suddenly, her partners were shoved to the ground in front of her, but 𝗏𝐾𝐽 was missing. Kirishima's face was pressed into the ground, mumbling about how unmanly the situation was, while Mina sat up, surveying the tall men who were smoking, their presence shrouded in the burning smell. 𝗏𝐼 glared at the man in front of her, clenching her teeth. She mustered her courage and proposed that if they were allowed to pass, they could leave peacefully, noting that by the time they could alert any heroes, the men would be long gone. The man laughed, causing her to flinch, and dismissed her as just another UA student, a young hero in training. Lost in thought, 𝗏𝐼 considered what a pro hero would do in this situation. Realizing she needed to act first, she prepared herself. As the men lunged toward her, she leaped above them, narrowly dodging their grasp and using her quirk to enhance her agility. She clung to the wall, digging her nails into the bricks for support. Meanwhile, Mina and Kirishima were engaged in hand-to-hand combat. Mina had coated herself in acid, ensuring that any hits she took would burn her attackers. 𝗏𝐼 climbed the wall, positioning herself closer to the villains. She noticed there were 4 more men in addition to those already fighting, making for a total of 9. Using her quirk, she put the villains to sleep one by one, feeling a headache coming on as she worked. She leaped down to the ground, landing with a thud and turning to assist her friends. They were holding their own, but it was clear they weren't winning. Kirishima charged headfirst into one of the men, slamming him against the wall with a loud thud, rendering him unconscious. With only 2 opponents remaining, both of whom had burned fists from their encounter with Mina, 𝗏𝐼 swiftly incapacitated them by pinching a nerve in their necks, freezing them in place. She let out a loud sigh, feeling the weight of the encounter. Hero work was exhausting. Mina laughed, and Kirishima nodded in agreement, praising 𝗏𝐼 for her impressive fighting skills. She blushed at the compliment, feeling a mix of pride and embarrassment. Mina then pointed out that there was still one more man who had confronted 𝗏𝐼 earlier. They all froze, scanning the area, but the man was nowhere to be found, and they couldn't recall ever having fought him. 𝗏𝐼 clenched her fist in frustration, realizing he had likely escaped. Mina reassured her that it was fine and suggested they go find 𝐼𝐻𝐸, noting that they had captured a few villains and could deal with the escaped one later. 𝗏𝐼 sighed but nodded in agreement. In the shadows, the escaped man cursed the UA students for disrupting his plans. He lamented the trouble he was in and considered how much they might have overheard. To be safe, he thought, it might be best to suggest eliminating the kid. That would surely appease the League and allow him to escape their wrath. Torturing the brat would also help him feel at ease. This was going to be so much fun for Izuku Midoriya. The man in the shadows slowly made his way through the cracks of the abandoned mansion, knowing the news he would bring was bad. At least he had the chance to confront a kid. Izuku felt a twinge of guilt. He was practically taking up the guy's bed, and he wasn't sure how the other would manage to sleep with him there. He thought about sleeping on the floor but didn't want to give the impression that he had vanished when the other returned. Leaving a note was an option, but he had no access to anything at the moment. He appreciated the company, even if it was just a voice in his head. The sound of the door creaking open pulled him from his thoughts. He faced away from the door, hoping the newcomer wouldn't see his expression. A loud bang echoed as the door slammed shut, followed by a drawn-out sigh. A shrill voice from downstairs exclaimed about burnt chicken nugget, showing attitude, to which another voice shouted back in frustration. Izuku couldn't help but feel a sense of belonging. He rolled in the bed, slowly turning toward the door, where he saw 𝗀𝗶𝐻 leaning his forehead against it. After a moment, he greeted 𝗀𝗶𝐻, who jerked his head toward him before turning around and sitting on the ground. 𝗀𝗶𝐻 seemed to have forgotten he was there, which made Izuku's heart sink. He quickly reassured himself that it wasn't meant to be hurtful. 𝗀𝗶𝐻 looked exhausted, rubbing his eyes. Izuku quietly asked about his day, surprised by his own courage. 𝗀𝗶𝐻's frown deepened as he responded, questioning why Izuku wasn't scared, given the circumstances. Izuku replied that 𝗀𝗶𝐻 needed him for something, and if he were to be killed, it would just mean the mission was complete. Silence followed, and Izuku reminded 𝗀𝗶𝐻 that he had asked the first question, so it was now 𝗀𝗶𝐻's turn to answer. Suddenly, he felt a weight on him as 𝗀𝗶𝐻 pinned him to the bed. In the darkness, he could barely see 𝗀𝗶𝐻's outline. 𝗀𝗶𝐻 questioned why Izuku kept talking about giving up on life, noting that he had a second chance. Izuku, feeling a mix of emotions, admitted he wasn't really listening. He joked about the meaning of life, referencing a famous answer. 𝗀𝗶𝐻's hand brushed against Izuku's cheek, causing him to widen his eyes in surprise. 𝗀𝗶𝐻 then expressed concern over Izuku's feelings of worthlessness, reminding him of their earlier conversation. Izuku blushed, nodding, hoping 𝗀𝗶𝐻 wouldn't notice. 𝗀𝗶𝐻 insisted he say it, and Izuku stammered out a reluctant agreement. Realizing their position, 𝗀𝗶𝐻 quickly got off, a blush visible on his face, which Izuku found oddly cute. 𝗀𝗶𝐻 muttered an apology, avoiding Izuku's gaze. Izuku felt uncertain about what to say, but the thought of asking 𝗀𝗶𝐻 about sleeping arrangements lingered in his mind. Finally, he stuttered out a question about whether he should sleep on the floor. 𝗀𝗶𝐻's expression shifted, and he mumbled about dealing with someone else later. 𝗀𝗶𝐻 then declared that Izuku would sleep in the bed and that he would figure something out. Izuku wanted to protest but decided against it, not wanting to add to 𝗀𝗶𝐻's exhaustion. He thanked 𝗀𝗶𝐻 as he opened the door again, and 𝗀𝗶𝐻 nodded before leaving, shutting the door softly behind him. Feeling a sense of comfort, Izuku lay back down on the soft bed, letting go of his earlier thoughts. He soon drifted off to sleep. In the middle of the night, 𝗀𝗶𝐻 found himself in a quiet room. He had a worn sleeping bag from downstairs, full of holes and quite unpleasant. Despite his initial temptation to kick Izuku out of the bed, he couldn't bring himself to do it. As he complained about the sleeping bag, he noticed a noise behind him. Glancing back, he saw Izuku shaking and sweating, tossing and turning in the bed. Concern washed over 𝗀𝗶𝐻 as he approached the kid, wondering if he would be restless all night. During the whole ordeal, he made quiet noises of pain and sadness. He was trapped in a nightmare. Panic surged through him as he thought about what to do. He had never helped someone through a nightmare, especially not a total stranger in his bed. Quickly sitting on the side of the bed, he shook the boy's shoulder, noting how cold his skin felt. He recalled that he had some experience with this kind of situation, thanks to his complicated family issues. He slowly sat the boy up, cradling him close. He whispered soothingly in his ear, trying to calm him down. Gradually, the boy's breathing became even, and he stopped shaking, though he remained a bit fidgety. He ruffled the boy's hair, marveling at how fluffy and soft it was. A small smile appeared on the boy's face as he nestled against his chest, purring contentedly. He felt a rush of warmth and affection, wondering how this kid could be so adorable. It made sense why Toga liked him as a friend, though he knew she was a bit obsessed. Gently laying the boy back down, he was about to return to his sleeping bag when the boy suddenly asked him to stay. He turned to see the little green head looking up at him, trembling slightly and gripping his arm tightly. With a sigh, he laid down next to him, shifting to get comfortable. The boy snuggled into his arm, purring again. He couldn't believe he was being so nice to him. Slowly, he drifted off to sleep. Warmth enveloped him as he woke up, a stark contrast to his usual mornings filled with sweat, tears, or screams. This time felt comfortable, and he didn't want to move. He snuggled deeper into the warmth, a nagging feeling in the back of his mind that he was forgetting something. He chose to ignore it until he remembered where he was. Hesitantly opening his eyes, he was startled to find 𝗂𝐷𝐵's face inches from his own. He felt his cheeks heat up and butterflies flutter in his stomach, too afraid to move in case he woke him. 𝗂𝐵's arms were wrapped around him, and he was wrapped around 𝗂𝐵's arm, covering himself. This was going to be awkward when 𝗂𝐵 woke up. A loud groan broke the silence, and he froze, closing his eyes tightly. The bed shifted again, then stilled. He considered screaming to break the tension but held back. After a moment, 𝗂𝐵 grunted and shifted again, muttering under his breath. Finally, he opened his eyes to meet 𝗂𝐵's surprised gaze. 𝗂𝐵 greeted him with a hesitant morning wish, his face slightly flushed. He simply stared back, feeling the awkwardness settle in. 𝗂𝐵 asked him to move off his arm, and he glanced down, realizing he was lying on it. He sat up, releasing 𝗂𝐵, and the uncomfortable silence hung in the air. 𝗂𝐵 got up and walked to the bathroom, closing the door behind him. He wondered what was going on with him. Moments later, he found himself questioning if he was crying like an anime character, a strange thought that made him chuckle. Suddenly, a blonde girl burst into the room, a knife in her hand. She smiled until she noticed his expression, then rushed over to hug him tightly, ignoring his attempts to break free. She asked if 𝗂𝐵 had hurt him and if she should stab him. He quickly shook his head, insisting he was fine, just experiencing some anime-style crying. Tears streamed from her eyes, transforming into bright yellow stars. She proudly declared that she could cry in an anime way too, her eyes overflowing with water. Footsteps echoed from the hallway, signaling the arrival of others, but he was too distracted to care. 𝗂𝐵 re-entered the room, questioning why he was crying, and Toga happily announced they were anime crying together. The attention felt overwhelming, and he buried his face in a pillow, feeling embarrassed. Toga's excitement only intensified the situation, and 𝗂𝐵 muttered something about her craziness. 𝗂𝐵 approached Toga, playfully nudging her aside and telling her to leave if they had no business there. Toga gasped in shock, pulling him into a tight hug and covering his ears, declaring that there would be no swearing in front of him. 𝗂𝐵 simply stared, and Shigaraki shrugged, seemingly unfazed by the chaos. Toga's determination was palpable as she insisted on keeping the cinnamon roll alive, her voice filled with a mix of frustration and fierce protectiveness. She shouted at the others, her words a whirlwind of emotion, while still managing to muffle the noise around them. 𝗂𝐵, visibly annoyed, decided to leave, muttering about getting a drink. With his departure, the atmosphere in the room shifted, feeling colder despite Toga's warm embrace. She was far different from the fierce warrior seen on the battlefield, her kindness creating an unsettling contrast. Toga tightened her grip, effectively blocking out most of the surrounding noise. Though Shigaraki and Toga were engaged in conversation, only fragments reached my ears. Suddenly, Toga wrapped a cloth around my mouth and nose, catching me off guard. A wave of drowsiness washed over me, and I realized what was happening. The world around me began to fade to black. That extra had the nerve to do that to him. 𝗂𝗏 was walking back to class after spending what felt like hours in the restroom. Shitty Hair was with him because apparently he was in the Protect the Angry Pomeranian squad. Bakugo felt annoyed when Shitty Hair called out to him, laughing nervously. He snarled in response, making Shitty Hair back up slightly under his gaze. Shitty Hair asked if he was feeling down about what had happened, but Bakugo dismissed him, demanding he forget it. It was strange how Shitty Hair seemed happy about something. Bakugo stormed off to class, hearing Shitty Hair's calls for him to slow down since he couldn't catch up. It reminded him of how Deku would always follow him when they were younger. Biting his lip, he felt something hot burning in his eyes. Tears were for weaklings, and he refused to cry. When he opened the huge door to the classroom, he saw that most of the other students were already there. The teacher was nowhere to be found, probably off somewhere sleeping. One thing that caught his attention was the same girl sitting in Deku's seat, the one who had somehow put him to sleep during their patrol. She was fiddling with the strap of her bag, glancing around at the rest of the class, who were too lost in their own conversations to notice her. Seeing her in Deku's spot made his blood boil. He stalked toward his seat, keeping his head down to avoid eye contact. Of course, when he sat down, he caught the attention of the girl behind him. She cautiously asked if he knew what they were doing now, as it was her first day in the class. He snorted in response, and she quickly retreated, sitting back down and staring at her hands. Finally, the other students noticed the interaction. Pikachu commented that Bakugo's behavior wasn't very nice, and Pinky chimed in with agreement. Bakugo dismissed them with a scoff. The door opened, signaling that the teacher had arrived. The class quieted down, everyone seeming to teleport to their seats. The teacher announced that Ms. Iroh would be replacing Midoriya for now, and depending on what happened next, the change could be permanent. The girl winced as some of the others glanced at her, and the teacher sighed, scratching under his eye. He explained that they would be enhancing their quirks today and instructed everyone to change into their costumes before meeting at Gym Gamma. The students slowly got up and left for the changing rooms, some grumbling along the way. Shitty Hair asked the new girl what she preferred to be called, and she replied that either Kurai or Rorai was fine, as people often called her Rorai. Pinky expressed excitement about hero training, eager to see everyone improve and learn new moves. Bakugo called back to the others, urging them to hurry up. Humanoid Pikachu teased him about caring for his friends, which only made Bakugo glare in response, insisting he didn't care about them at all. They arrived at the training grounds on time, but the mood was still gloomy. All Might wouldn't be teaching the class, and without his cheerful presence, everyone seemed grumpy and downcast. The absence of Deku, who had always been a source of hope, weighed heavily on them all. The other students had apologized to Bakugo, acknowledging their wrongs and expressing a longing to earn the title of hero again. Bakugo huffed, feeling the gloom match the atmosphere of the class. The teacher stood in front of the gym doors, eyeing the students. Shitty Hair called out to Bakugo, asking if he wanted to hear an idea for a new way to use his quirk. Bakugo turned to him, snorting in response. The teacher informed them that they would be training on their own for now and warned them not to go overboard. He opened the doors to reveal the training area, where Cementos was reading a newspaper in the corner. Shitty Hair rallied Mina and Rorai to work together to help Bakugo with a new trick he had in mind. Mina's enthusiasm was evident, and Bakugo found it annoying. Rorai approached nervously, suggesting that Bakugo try to be nicer or at least stop yelling, as it made it hard for her to think. Bakugo glared at her, and she shrank back, hiding behind Shitty Hair. They were ready to start their training, and Bakugo prepared himself for whatever was to come next. The green-haired boy remained asleep, now settled in a more comfortable chair instead of the old metal one. The quirk erasing cuffs had been transformed into a choker, resting around his neck. Toga, being her usual self, took it upon herself to admire Izuku's sleeping face, simply sitting there and staring. 𝗟𝗶𝐻 shot her odd looks, clearly bothered by the attention she was giving Izuku. Shigaraki shared the sentiment, thinking that Toga's behavior was rather inappropriate. Eventually, they had Kurogiri tie her to another chair in a separate room they referred to as the living room. Although they called it that, its original purpose was a mystery. It was a mansion after all, so who really cared? In the bar, a somewhat partial silence enveloped the group, punctuated by Toga's protests from the other room. Everything seemed to be going just fine. The greenette stirred, catching the attention of 𝗟𝗶𝐻. 𝗟𝗶𝐻 remarked that the boy was waking up, prompting Shigaraki to snort in response, indifferent to the situation. 𝗟𝗶𝐻 pressed further, questioning why they had brought Izuku down there in the first place. A loud bang echoed through the room as Shigaraki's head met the counter, and he grunted in annoyance. Kurogiri urged Shigaraki to get up, reminding him that he had a job to do. Shigaraki groaned but eventually sat up straight, adopting a serious demeanor as he stood in front of the waking boy. When Izuku opened his eyes, he showed no reaction at all, prompting a sigh from Shigaraki. Shigaraki stated that they would like him to join the League of Villains, presenting it as his best option. Izuku's eyes widened, not in surprise but in a way that conveyed unexpected joy. He tilted his head, grinning as he asked what his other option was. Shigaraki let out a dry laugh, suggesting they could fulfill his wish. Izuku stared at him, lost in thought. His expression shifted from happiness to one that appeared hollow and empty. He questioned why they wanted him in the league, expressing doubts about his usefulness. 𝗟𝗶𝐻 tensed at the boy's self-deprecating words. Shigaraki leaned forward, insisting that Izuku was not useless if 𝐼𝐴 found a purpose for him. Izuku frowned, flatly asking if 𝐼𝐴 wanted to steal his quirk or eliminate him. 𝗂𝐵 chuckled, while Kurojiiri seemed to shake his head, though his misty form made it hard to tell. Shigaraki frowned again, advising Izuku that it was best not to know until they could fully trust him. Izuku laughed in response, pointing out the contradiction in their request for him to join without revealing what that special place entailed. A loud scream echoed from Toga's direction, and Izuku's grin widened. Shigaraki explained that Izuku had kept his quirk a secret from everyone except those he truly trusted, which was why they were cautious about sharing information. This revelation caught Izuku off guard, and 𝗂𝐵's curiosity was piqued. 𝗂𝐵 asked if 𝐼𝐴 had told them or if they had picked up on subtle clues. His voice turned cold, causing a chill in the room. The tension was palpable, and the others could sense the weight of the moment. Izuku, too, felt a strange mix of fear and excitement as he embraced this darker side of himself. Shigaraki took a step back, his expression darkening as he pressed for an answer. He reached forward and ruffled Izuku's green locks in an unexpectedly affectionate gesture, stating that it was up to him, as he preferred not to have any more family BLD on his hands. This statement surprised everyone in the room. 𝗂𝐵 stood up straight, questioning what Shigaraki meant by family BLD. Shigaraki dropped his hand, and Izuku's gaze followed it as he became lost in thought. Shigaraki explained that it was something personal, revealing that Sensei had deemed Izuku important, a fact he had only recently discovered. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed through the room as metal slammed against metal. Everyone turned to the door behind Izuku, except for him, remained deep in thought. Toga burst into the room, her eyes wild and bloodshot, giving the impression that she had lost her mind. She announced her return with enthusiasm, swinging her knives in an arc before throwing one just above Izuku's head, aiming for a picture of All Might on the wall. She declared her thirst, demanding a BLD packet before threatening to harm everyone in the room. No one seemed frightened. Kurojiiri ducked under the bar table and returned with a container. Toga lunged toward the table, slamming her hands down and drooling in anticipation. Kurojiiri poured the contents into a cup, which she gulped down in one swift motion. 𝗂𝐵 cringed at the scene, questioning why they had Toga with them. Shigaraki shrugged as Toga drank several more cups of the crimson liquid. Izuku, still in his chair with his head lowered, asked how it felt to have a father figure present during difficult times, only to be ripped away again. His voice darkened as he continued, expressing the pain of discovering that his father had been absent for 15 years, only to learn that he was alive and had not reached out to him or his family. Tears streamed down his face, leaving red marks on his freckled cheeks as he cried out in anguish about his father's neglect, especially after the loss of his mother. Shigaraki was left speechless, 𝗂𝐵 was shocked, Toga was captivated by the unfolding drama, and Kurojiiri listened intently to Izuku's heartfelt outburst. Izuku hung his head low again, staring at the ground, grappling with the reality of having living family members who were still alive. Yet he still felt unwanted. Izuku whimpered softly. Toga got off her seat and hugged him, patting his head and whispering soothingly in his ear. She reassured him that he was all right now, while 𝗂𝐵 observed with a puzzled expression. Izuku sobbed until he finally passed out. Shigaraki, his expression as hard as stone, turned to 𝗂𝐵, his face still grim. He instructed 𝗂𝐵 to take Izuku back to his room and let him sleep for now. 𝗂𝐵 nodded, choosing silence as Shigaraki's mood was clearly tense, and he didn't want to worsen it. He picked up the sleeping boy, ignoring Toga's protest as he took Izuku away. Carrying Izuku to his room, 𝗂𝐵 laid him down on the bed, making sure he was comfortable. Just as he was about to leave, he noticed Izuku whimpering in his sleep. 𝗂𝐵 looked back to see the boy tossing and turning. A thought crossed his mind, and despite its silliness, he leaned down closer to the sleeping boy and placed a gentle kiss on his forehead. To his surprise, Izuku stopped moving, a small smile appearing on his lips as his breathing steadied. 𝗂𝐵 couldn't help but smirk at the sight. He whispered a good night to Izuku before quietly leaving the room and closing the door behind him. When 𝗂𝐵 returned downstairs, he noticed another man standing next to the metal chair where Izuku had been sitting. Shigaraki leaned against the counter, his expression unreadable. The man sighed, running a hand through his black hair with silver stripes, and mentioned the new kid from the UA incident, Izuku Midoriya. Dabi and Toga tensed, exchanging glances to see Shigaraki's reaction. The other villains in the room, including Twice, Mr. Compress, Spinner, and a few others, listened intently. Shigaraki asked what the man wanted with Izuku. The man leaned on the chair, a devilish smirk on his face, and suggested they should eliminate the boy to relieve some tension. The villains contemplated this, agreeing among themselves, but Shigaraki remained silent, as did Toga, Dabi, and Kurogiri. The man frowned and proposed they could at least torture him instead. Shigaraki finally spoke, his voice firm, stating that the boy was important and needed to be kept alive and in good condition. The man protested, insisting they should do something to make the hero's life miserable, especially since he was the same person who had taken down 𝐼𝐼. The other villains silently agreed, but Shigaraki remained resolute. Dabi clenched his fists, but before he could respond, Toga rushed at the man, swiftly placing her knife under his chin, declaring that they would not harm Izuku. She argued that he was still human and had suffered like them, being pushed away by society. Ryoki, the man, stared her down, insisting they couldn't let a hero become a villain in their ranks. Dabi stepped in, drawing the attention of the other villains. He argued that Izuku was broken, perhaps even more so than them, and that killing him would be a waste of a potential ally. He suggested that turning the symbol of hope into a feared villain would be a far greater blow to their enemies. Ryoki scoffed, questioning what good Izuku would be since he wasn't strong enough. Dabi, now furious, insisted that with proper guidance and training, Izuku could become a formidable villain. He was willing to bet that Izuku would become the most feared villain on the planet. Toga glanced at Shigaraki, who sighed and stated that they would not harm Izuku. He told Ryoki to leave immediately, warning him that some in the room were eager to take action against him. Ryoki bolted, dust rising in his wake. Toga shouted in disbelief that they let him escape. Shigaraki shrugged, indicating that he never said she couldn't follow. Toga let out a determined cry and dashed after Ryoki, her knives glinting in the dim light. Dabi turned to Shigaraki, still fuming, questioning why he hadn't intervened when Ryoki threatened Izuku. Shigaraki shrugged again, explaining that he wanted to see how Dabi would react. He reassured Dabi that he would not allow anyone to harm Izuku, whom he considered family, though he noted that only Dabi and Kurogiri were aware of this. Moments later, Toga returned, looking as if she had been in a messy situation, holding a bucket filled to the brim with a red liquid. She laughed giddily, expressing her excitement. Meanwhile, Bakugo observed his classmates, feeling exasperated. One of them tripped and fell, causing laughter among the others. They discussed the effectiveness of their stealth missions, with one girl pointing out that Bakugo usually preferred to strike first rather than be stealthy. Bakugo dismissed their comments, noting that the idea was not entirely his own, but he acknowledged that figuring out how to create smoke explosions could be useful. As one of his classmates struggled to see, another cried out in panic, prompting Bakugo to roll his eyes and assign a nickname to her. He asked another student if she could help them regain their senses. She nodded and quickly moved to assist her classmates, placing her hands on their foreheads to help them recover. 𝐼𝐼𝐻 exclaimed with excitement, announcing that he could hear again. Shitty Hair jumped up, expressing his relief that everything was no longer white, and thanked 𝗏𝗏. Licorice Hair felt a flush of embarrassment as she turned to me, unsure of how to respond. Licorice Hair hesitated before asking about her nickname. She glanced at 𝗏𝗏𝐻, who gave her a thumbs up, encouraging her. Shitty Hair explained with a grin that Bakugo often gave people nicknames, assuring her it was normal. Licorice Hair nodded, beginning to accept the quirkiness of the situation. She then posed a question about Midoriya, the boy she had saved, curious about his nickname. When she waved her arms in the air, the group seemed to react with discomfort. I grimaced and replied that his nickname was Deku, noting her surprise. 𝗏𝗏𝐻 suddenly pointed out that Midoriya was the only one without a nickname based on a visible trait, while the rest of us had nicknames tied to our physical features. Shitty Hair trailed off, caught by the intensity of my glare. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃𝐿 observed that 𝐼𝐻𝐻 must be special to me, but I turned away, feeling a surge of anger. I dismissed the conversation, raising my fists as sparks danced in my palms, signaling that it was time to continue. The others took their fighting stances, two grinning while the third looked determined. With a fierce shout, I declared that we would take on the challenge ahead, ready to face whatever came our way. Everything hurt. Izuku felt a headache pounding in his skull, his forehead burning, his stomach churning, and his eyes refusing to open. He lay on the ground instead of his bed, wondering if he was going to die. Dying of starvation was neither heroic nor cool. Suddenly, he heard the metal door slide open, a sliver of light filtering through. He whimpered as strong arms lifted him, leaving him feeling helpless. A voice called for Shigaraki, Toga, and 𝐾𝐿, demanding their presence urgently. The sound of pounding footsteps signaled their arrival. Shigaraki's blank expression conveyed confusion as he asked what was happening. Izuku's vision cleared momentarily, and he saw Toga stumbling toward him, holding an odd container. The strong scent of BLD filled his senses, and everything that followed became a blur of yells and screams as his body moved on its own. A liquid flowed down his throat, bitter yet sweet, filling his empty stomach and easing his hunger. When he regained consciousness, he found himself crouched on the ground, something shattered beneath him. A metallic taste lingered in his mouth, and he liked his lips, feeling oddly full. He looked around to see Toga, Shigaraki, and 𝗂𝗶𝐻 standing at a distance. 𝗂𝗶𝐻's eyes widened in surprise, a strange satisfaction crossing his face. Izuku stared in confusion at the shattered remains of the container Toga had held earlier. Toga squealed with delight, exclaiming that he had just drunk BLD. He wiped his lips, noticing the red liquid on his hands. Shigaraki coughed to get his attention, advising him not to eat anyone. Toga playfully whacked Shigaraki on the head for that comment. Izuku muttered about still being hungry, prompting 𝗂𝗶𝐻 to offer to get 𝐾𝐿 to prepare something. Toga approached him with a grin, suggesting they become BLD partners and hunt for more tasty BLD at night. She excitedly mentioned Renfield syndrome, claiming it was awesome if he had it too. Izuku shrugged, sitting properly with his knees folded. He hesitated to discuss the memory of All Might and his mother, preferring to change the subject. He asked whose BLD he had consumed, noting it had a sour taste. Toga gleefully revealed it was Ryoki's BLD, the man who had tried to kill him. 𝗂𝗶𝐻 returned with a metal tray filled with food, instructing Toga to back off. He placed the tray in front of Izuku, asking if he needed to be fed. Izuku leaned against the bed, asserting that he could use a fork despite feeling weak. 𝗂𝗶𝐻 snorted and backed away as Izuku reached for the food, eyeing it warily and questioning if it was poisoned. 𝗂𝗶𝐻 face-bombed, then demonstrated that it was safe by eating a piece himself. Izuku bit his lip, suppressing laughter at 𝗂𝗶𝐻's serious demeanor. Once he started eating, he found the food bland, likely due to the BLD he had consumed earlier. He devoured the meal quickly, realizing it was the first proper meal he had in what felt like a month. 𝗂𝗶𝐻 snapped him out of his thoughts, nudging him to check if he was back to reality. Izuku felt a warmth in his cheeks as he muttered that 𝗂𝗶𝐻 was too close. 𝗂𝗶𝐻 backed away, and Izuku felt a chill in his absence. They sat in silence, Izuku lost in thought about the taste of BLD and whether it varied based on a person's behavior or BLD type. He felt hunger stir again, but not for food. 𝗂𝗶𝐻's low growl broke the quiet as he apologized for forgetting that Izuku needed to eat, admitting it was a habit to take for himself. Izuku nodded, apologizing for worrying 𝗂𝗶𝐻. 𝗂𝗶𝐻 insisted it was his fault, and they shared a moment of understanding. 𝗂𝗶𝐻 mentioned that Izuku could join him downstairs, but warned that most people still saw him as a hero, and it was better not to know what happened to heroes in their world. As Izuku curled up on the floor, 𝗂𝗶𝐻 sighed and wrapped him in his arms, lifting him effortlessly and placing him on the bed. Before Izuku could say anything, 𝗂𝗶𝐻 left the room, leaving him feeling uncertain and lonely. The voice echoed in the depths of the mind, insisting that it was more than just a fleeting thought. It declared its identity as Banshee, demanding recognition as a real person, just like the one it was speaking to. The response was filled with bitterness, reflecting a feeling of being treated poorly. Banshee countered, asserting that, For villains, the treatment was more akin to being coddled. The tension escalated as the question of how one could understand such treatment arose. Banshee revealed its identity as a villain, which left the other voice in disbelief. Confusion filled the air as the question of why Banshee was in the mind lingered. The response was firm, emphasizing a lack of obligation to explain. The insistence on uncovering the truth led to a revelation that Banshee was not there by choice, but rather forced into this situation. When pressed for details about the circumstances, Banshee hesitated, expressing a reluctance to share. The frustration grew as the other voice pointed out the imbalance of knowledge between them, demanding to know more. Silence followed, thick with unspoken thoughts. Then, Banshee suggested a peculiar exercise: to lie down and close the eyes, urging the other to pretend to sleep. Reluctantly, the individual complied, feeling a mix of disbelief and resignation. As they lay on the bed, a scowl formed on their face, grappling with the absurdity of the situation. Minutes passed in stillness, and uncertainty crept in. The mind began to feel fuzzy, a sense of panic rising. Banshee's voice returned, soothing yet insistent, urging calmness. Fatigue settled in, and as the eyelids grew heavy, the individual surrendered to the familiar embrace of darkness, drifting into a deep slumber. Izuku jolted awake, his stomach churning as he felt something rise in his throat. He stumbled into the bathroom, barely making it to the toilet as he emptied the contents of his stomach. His body quaked, remembering the horrific visions that haunted him. He sat beside the toilet, clutching his stomach while tears streamed down his cheeks. He felt a surge of anger as he thought about the chaos. He shouted in frustration, feeling the weight of the situation. It wasn't his choice, but the guilt consumed him. He felt trapped in a cycle of despair, questioning the choices that had led him to this moment. He couldn't believe he was the same person as the one responsible for such devastation. 𝗟𝗶𝐻𝗸 rushed to his side, hugging him tightly. Izuku could sense 𝗟𝗶𝐻𝗸's concern, but he was too overwhelmed to care. 𝗟𝗶𝐻𝗸 asked if he was all right, noticing the signs of distress. Izuku buried his face deeper into 𝗟𝗶𝐻𝗸's clothes, finding comfort in the familiar scent. 𝗟𝗶𝐻𝗸's voice was laced with worry as he commented on Izuku's condition, emphasizing that it was normal to feel this way given the circumstances. Izuku felt a flicker of warmth at 𝗟𝗶𝐻𝗸's understanding. They sat in silence, a comfortable stillness for Izuku but awkward for 𝗟𝗶𝐻𝗸. Suddenly, 𝗏𝗏's playful voice broke the moment, excitedly announcing her discovery of their embrace. 𝗟𝗶𝐻𝗸 reacted with exaggerated frustration, and Izuku couldn't help but laugh at their antics. As time passed, Izuku remembered that he hadn't showered in days. He wiped his eyes and got up slowly, glancing at his reflection in the mirror. He was taken aback by his appearance. His right eye gleamed a bright red, and his hair was messier than usual. A scar marred his forehead, a reminder of the pain he had endured. Curiously, he lifted his bangs to inspect the scar, which extended down to just below his red eye, resembling a small upside-down triangle on his cheek. It gave him a fierce look, one he never thought he would possess. He leaned against the counter, frustration boiling over as he questioned what was happening to him. He felt a surge of emotions, fear, anger, and confusion, as he scratched at the scar, feeling a burning sensation. Distant screams echoed in the background, but he tried to ignore them. Sitting down with his back against the counter, he hugged his knees to his chest. The screams grew louder, and he realized they were not from 𝗏𝗏𝐻𝗸. The pain in his head intensified, and he groaned, rubbing the scar as the noise became overwhelming. Suddenly, he was engulfed in darkness, witnessing a vision of himself in torment. Ghostly figures surrounded him, unleashing energy at a figure that seemed to be in agony. One of the past holders of One for All struck, and Izuku felt a sharp pain in his chest, as if his heart had been ripped out. He screamed, his cries mingling with the figures, drawing the attention of the ghosts. As the pain subsided, he found himself breathing on the ground, watching as the figure healed. All Might appeared before him, his expression filled with sorrow. Izuku felt tears well up in his eyes at the sight of his mentor. All Might reached out, embracing him tightly, and Izuku smiled through his tears. They exchanged words, and Izuku explained that he had passed out from the pain. All Might's concern deepened as he pointed to the figure, questioning if it was the source of Izuku's suffering. Izuku shook his head, assuring All Might that the figure hadn't harmed him. He actually helped sometimes. Banshee tilted his head, the other wielders of One for All having faded away, leaving only Nana Shimura. I did. Now I remember. I've helped you multiple times but have never been thanked. But I guess since we're the same person, it's like I'm helping myself, he grumbled. All Might appeared shocked, recognizing Midoriya. Midoriya laughed nervously, realizing it was his first time seeing what Banshee looked like. It wasn't too hard to tell who he was, but out of context, he could easily be mistaken for someone entirely different. Yeah, I am just villain him. Please don't attack me again. I'd hate to kill you a second time, even though you're already dead. All Might glared at Banshee. I may be dead, but I can still radiate you from Midoriya's body. Banshee snorted. I wish. It's not like I want to be here. But if you remove me, you'll kill Izuku in the process. Midoriya tilted his head, genuinely curious. All Might now wore a stern expression. We're not going to remove him, Izuku. You won't die, so stop asking. Banshee frowned. I am cursed. I only leave my host's body when they die, so I can feel the most pain possible from the person and their emotions. It's really agonizing. I'm surprised I haven't gone crazy yet. Banshee continued muttering, his bright red eyes glinting. Everyone stared at him, the same thought echoing in their minds. He already is crazy. Cursed. What are you talking about? Midoriya asked, confused. Banshee shrugged. Forget about it. And, you know, being here counts as using your quirk, right? Midoriya shuddered. What do the cuffs do if I manage to break through them? Banshee shrugged again. All Might and Nana Shimura exchanged glances, lost in the conversation. Izuku, it's best you leave now to hopefully avoid causing any further damage, Nana finally spoke. Banshee sighed. You're lucky, Izuku. You have these guardian angels looking after you while I have hell and heaven in my grasp. Not a good combo. Midoriya ignored him, finding Banshee's cryptic speeches hard to decipher. All Might and Nana regarded it as a joke. Alright, how do I get out of here? Midoriya squinted through the darkness, hoping something would magically appear with all the answers. Nana smiled sweetly, reassuring him that everything would be okay. Just let yourself rest. Kind of like falling asleep. He nodded, calming himself with deep breaths. Did it work? He asked, receiving no response. He opened his eyes, which had shut during his breathing session, only to find himself back in the bathroom, sitting on the ground. Now, there was screaming coming from downstairs instead of in his head, and the voice was familiar, a screeching sound he had heard many times before. Toga was in distress. He laughed, getting up on numb legs. His neck burned, and he glanced at the mirror, noticing a little blood leaking from the collar. Totally fine. He tried using One for All, flicking his fingers at the window. The wall was gone. He stared at the empty space that had once been a brick structure with a window and bars. Turning around, he whistled and walked out of the room. He wondered what 𝗂𝗶𝐻𝗸 would think when he saw that. It was his chance to escape. He could leave and return to his own life. He paused at the door, hand clasping the handle. His gaze shifted to the other door in the room, and he bit his lip. Millions of thoughts swarmed his mind as he stared at the door. He had two choices, and depending on which he took, it would have a significant impact on his future. He still wanted to be a hero, but he doubted he could handle all the hate and abuse. If he stayed, he could die or become a villain, which also carried the risk of death. But then again, heroes could die too, often with honor, sacrificing their lives for those they saved. Who would even give him a second thought if he died as a hero? Already seen as a villain in everyone's eyes, there wasn't much difference between these two paths. It was just switching sides. So, what would he choose? He had one more question for himself. Did he want to go back? Still standing at the door, he contemplated whether to stay or leave. It was up to him. No one would try to stop him, no matter what he chose. He nodded, acknowledging the voice. He took a deep breath, then opened the door and went down the stairs to the bar area. Nice choice. He saw the other villains, noticing Toga screaming at Shigaraki and a pile of ash on the floor. 𝗟𝗶𝐻 was grinning, leaning against the bar stool with his arms over his head, as if he had just defeated a challenging boss in a video game. You were supposed to catch it, not destroy it. Now I have no blackmail. Toga screamed, shaking as she continued to yell. Never mind, they couldn't hear anything if she had been screaming like that for the past 10 minutes. He coughed loudly to get their attention. All the villains turned to stare at him, and it was horrifying to feel the weight of their gazes, knowing they might want to harm him. Twice tilted his head toward him. How did you get out? He asked in a light voice. Midoriya shrugged. The door was unlocked. Toga squeaked, scratching at her neck from all the screaming she had done. She pointed at the bleeding mark on my neck, exclaiming that I was hurt. I poked at the dry blood, feeling no pain as a bit. More trickled out. I nervously explained that I had blasted the wall in the bathroom with my quirk. Everyone stared, and 𝗟𝗶𝐻's smile vanished. I glanced around the room, noticing the blank expressions on their faces, including Toga, who stood straight in the center. They seemed frozen in time, and I held my breath, afraid that if I exhaled, they might react explosively. 𝗟𝗶𝐻 was the first to move, running up the stairs to his room, which seemed to break the spell. Slowly, everyone began to move again. Shigaraki asked in disbelief what I had done, glancing at 𝐾𝐿. He questioned whether the cuffs would break, and 𝐾𝐿 shrugged, though it was hard to tell. Shigaraki groaned, staring at me as a yell echoed from upstairs, sending a wave of fear through me. I quickly ran over to Toga, gripping her shoulders and hiding behind her. She giggled, pulling out a knife and taking a defensive stance. 𝗟𝗶𝐻 stormed out of the door at the top of the stairs, glaring around. He shouted at me, demanding to know what I was trying to do. I shivered, clutching Toga's arm as I stammered an explanation. I insisted I wasn't trying to escape, I was just testing my quirk since I had accidentally broken the choker. I felt uncomfortable being the center of attention. Toga, ever the supportive friend, defended me, insisting it was an accident and questioning 𝗟𝗶𝐻's doubts about my honesty. She pulled me closer, almost like a protective hug, and squished my cheeks, which made 𝗟𝗶𝐻 blush and look away. Toga then asked what we should do next, curious about why I hadn't escaped despite the opportunity. Shigaraki echoed her question, reminding me that I was in 𝗟𝗶𝐻's room for a reason, with the wall in the bathroom surrounded by cameras and traps. I struggled to find an answer without mumbling, feeling overwhelmed. Toga urged me to speak louder, and I closed my eyes, suddenly feeling drowsy. Darkness clouded my vision as I stumbled to the ground, hearing shouts of protest that I couldn't comprehend. When I opened my eyes again, I was in a different form, seeing through Izuku's eyes. I glanced around the room, noting the curious and worried looks of the villains. I brought my hands to my face, trying to appear curious. Toga noticed something unusual about my eyes, commenting that they were glowing red. I lowered my hands and grinned, declaring that I was not Izuku. I realized that I needed to explain my presence, but I could sense their suspicion. I offered to share my story, presenting options for how long the explanation could be. Shigaraki questioned why I couldn't just explain it plainly, and I smirked, teasing that there was no fun in that. I clarified that Izuku was the one who had been kidnapped, while I was more like a parasite in his head. They stared at me, some looking bewildered. I explained that if they wanted more details, they would need to sit down and listen. Toga gasped in mock surprise at my choice of words, and I rolled my eyes at her reaction. Reluctantly, they found places to sit or stand, some choosing to leave or ignore me. I began my tale with a whimsical tone, setting the stage for the story I was about to share. The atmosphere felt desolate, almost like a ghost town. A few lovely comments had been received, and gratitude was extended to those who took the time to share their thoughts. However, there was a strong longing for more engagement. The character was overwhelmed with anger, and their emotions were palpable. A mysterious voice echoed in the background, reminiscent of a banshee, adding to the tension of the moment. "You're not dead." In a vast, empty expanse of pitch-black darkness, Izuku floated, disoriented by the endless abyss that surrounded him. He had no sense of direction, unable to tell up from down or left from right. His voice echoed into the void, asking where he was, but it felt as if no one could hear him. Suddenly, he plunged downward, his eyes widening as red, orange, and yellow lights glowed below him. He fell faster, landing somewhere far from the comfort of his bed. Blinking away what felt like ash, he coughed out smoke, bewildered by his surroundings. Before him lay a devastated landscape that resembled Japan, engulfed in flames. He gasped at the sight of destruction, the acrid smell of decay filling his nostrils. Buildings and vehicles were scattered chaotically, as if the very depths of despair had risen to claim this place. There was no corner untouched by tragedy. As he walked through the rubble, tears began to flow from his eyes. The devastation was overwhelming. He saw the bodies of heroes, villains, and innocent citizens alike strewn across the ground, a haunting reminder of what had been lost. One sight shook him to his core, nearly causing him to lose his composure. All Might in his normal form hung limply from the edge of a building, his limbs gone, pinned to the structure. Beneath him, giant letters formed from crimson marked the ground, symbol of peace. Izuku sobbed, his heart breaking at the sight. He cried out, questioning what he was being shown. The ground shifted beneath him, the view twisting and turning until he found himself in a different area, still ablaze but less ravaged. A man limped through the chaos, recognizable by the gauntlets on his hands. Izuku called out to him, but the blonde did not respond, seemingly unaware of his presence. The blonde stopped, his expression one of anguish and despair. Ahead, some rubble had been cleared, revealing a green-haired male who smiled down at Izuku. He leaped down gracefully, landing just a few meters away. "Nice seeing you here, Lord 𝐒𝐮𝐬, the man laughed, his voice echoing with madness. Bakugo growled in response, while Izuku stared in shock, dread creeping into his mind as realization dawned on him. The blonde cried out in frustration, demanding to know why. The other male only chuckled, causing Izuku to fall to his knees as he watched the scene unfold. "There's always a reason for everything. Ain't that right, Kaken?" He cooed, his red eyes glowing ominously in the darkness. Izuku's heart sank as he processed the implications. "Killed everyone. I did this. Banshee is me." The world was scorching. The heat radiating from the Earth's crust felt as if it could erupt at any moment, the molten core overheating beneath. All of this destruction. For what? Nearly everyone on the planet was gone. How had it come to this? With the help of demons and angels, collecting those lost souls. It was uncertain whether it was a gift or a curse to communicate with the unnatural. They meant well, keeping the spirits of those lost out of her mind, preventing them from haunting her and driving her toward madness. But that torment was inevitable. The echoes of their screams and shouts of rage before their demise were punishment enough. That was the origin of her name, Banshee, meaning a screaming spirit. She had taken it on as her own. Though she had not been born with this power, she had come to embrace it. Standing on mountains of rubble, possibly atop many bodies, she could see a fraction of the burning world. That fraction was the city of Mustafa, located in Japan. It was just a small portion of the devastation. She was terrified of what she had done. She had wanted to be a hero. But fate had a way of twisting even the best intentions. At least this fate was better than what they would have faced, or so she constantly reminded herself. The skies were empty, devoid of clouds. The molten core was overheating, no longer nourished by the spirits that had once thrived in that environment. They had vacated, taking the clouds with them as a sign of the empty domain above. Some people were still alive, and she could practically feel their hatred directed toward her. She deserved it, she knew that. If they had listened to her reasons, as some had, they might have understood. A few had even taken their own lives, believing in her cause. It filled her with sorrow. Why did such kind, innocent people have to perish because of this monster that was supposed to destroy the earth? She wasn't insane, not entirely. She had her reasons, even if they were difficult to comprehend. Even her closest friends had doubted her, like Iida and Uraraka, who had been among the first to fall. When she had shared her vision with the world, she had been sent to a mental hospital, not one that offered help but rather a place resembling the prisons depicted in horror stories. It was a place where people were confined, some screaming in despair, others restrained to their beds. It was a nightmare that could shatter anyone's sanity. She had been trapped there for 10 long years, simply because she was often seen talking to the wall. It wasn't her fault that demons from hell and angels from heaven chose to visit her. She couldn't bear this world any longer. She still remembered when everything had been fine, before the vision that was supposed to be a divine warning. She wished that the monster had never come to their planet. Why couldn't it have destroyed something else? Why their home? Why was she chosen to bring about such devastation? How would anyone react to a vision from God, foretelling the end of the world and the need to eliminate nearly everyone to stop that beast from growing stronger? Would they ignore it or take action? The vision haunted her dreams, becoming more vivid with each passing night, warning her that the day was approaching. When that day finally arrived, she faced an old friend, or perhaps a lover in her world. She knew they were both destined to die. In that moment she allowed him to end her life. That stubborn ash blonde had chosen to fight instead. She couldn't bring herself to kill him. His cleverness kept him safe from her powers, so he survived. In the end it didn't matter. They both perished together. She had been his hero one last time, and the monster had destroyed their planet. That monster had ruined everything. Her chance to be a hero in the eyes of others, to have a family, to experience genuine happiness. It was something she hadn't felt for a long time. If she were honest, she wouldn't have changed anything during that battle with 𝐾𝐿. She had no regrets about what had happened then. For the first time in years, she had felt happiness when she saved his life from the monster's grasp. It was a fleeting moment, but it was real. Sometimes she felt as if she were still at 𝐒𝐮𝐬, still holding on to her childish dreams. She wished her friends were still alive, but she didn't regret their deaths. They had left early, spared from witnessing how broken she had become, unlike 𝐾𝐿. Everyone was staring at the green-haired figure who called himself Banshee, a serious expression on his face as he surveyed the villains, unimpressed. He insisted that his story was not a fairy tale, and if anyone doubted him, they could keep their opinions to themselves. 𝗟𝗶𝐻𝗸 shifted uncomfortably, expressing skepticism about the truth of Banshee's claims, questioning whether the other villains from his world would have tried to stop him. Banshee explained that he had indeed been their target for a time, but ultimately, he had overcome them all. He noted that it was reassuring to see that the villains before him were not solely defined by bloodshed and violence. Shigaraki shrugged, doubting that Banshee could have taken them all on alone. Banshee casually mentioned that it had only taken him about a minute to defeat Shigaraki, pointing out the vulnerability of his hands. Toga, curious, asked about Banshee's relationship with Bakugo, prompting a glare from him. He clarified that they were not in a relationship, and even if they had been, it had ended before it truly began. Toga pressed further, suggesting that he must have had feelings for Bakugo, which caused Banshee to scowl, a stark contrast to the cheerful demeanor typically associated with Izuku. As the conversation continued, Toga reminded Banshee that he had not answered their question about Izuku's choice to stay with them. Banshee shrugged, explaining that he was not their Izuku and that the decision was his alone. He shared what he had heard about Izuku's situation, indicating that returning would not change anything for him, as he would still be hated or worse. The villains absorbed this information, trying to comprehend the weight of Banshee's words. Toga, confused, asked what it meant to be hated. 𝗟𝗶𝐻𝗸 frowned, recalling how they had witnessed the disdain directed at Izuku, which had pushed him to the brink of despair. Toga argued that hate could be ignored, insisting that there must have been another reason for Izuku's actions. Banshee acknowledged Toga's insight, which elicited chuckles from the others. He then revealed that just a day before his suicide attempt, Izuku's mother had been murdered, plunging the room into a heavy silence. Mr. 𝐼𝐻𝐸 inquired if anyone had known about this, and Banshee explained that it had been kept private, leaving Izuku without the chance to confide in anyone. Banshee reflected on his own feelings of regret, wishing he could have done more to help Izuku. He absent-mindedly touched a faded scar on his skin, a reminder of his own struggles. Spinner then interjected, asking if there were any differences in Banshee's universe compared to theirs. Banshee thought for a moment before revealing that he had been quirkless in his world, which surprised the others. Shigaraki noted that Izuku had also been quirkless in their world, leading Banshee to express disbelief. He continued to share that he had been much older in his time, having lived for over 200 years, a fact that astonished the villains. 𝗀𝐿 asked how old he had been when he died, and Banshee recalled being around. Toga exclaimed that he was older than most people present, to which Banshee reminded her of his actual age. Their playful banter continued, with Toga insisting that he should use the age at which he died. Banshee coughed to regain their attention, noting that it was time for him to 𝗬𝗧𝗟𝐷, uncertain of how long he was meant to take control. He expressed concern about the potential drawbacks of his presence, and Shigaraki nodded in understanding. 𝗀𝗶𝐻 shot glares at the villain, expressing his displeasure. The villain grinned and skipped toward the rooms. Upon entering his assigned room, he was overtaken by a fit of coughs, crimson liquid staining his hands as he wiped it away. It seemed true what they said about having two souls in one body being dangerous. He walked to the bed, lying down and getting comfortable before releasing his grip on the body, allowing himself to slip back into the deep thicket of darkness within his mind. Time passed, and Izuku woke up, forcefully pulled from whatever dream he had been in. Lying on what he assumed was 𝗀𝗶𝐻's bed, he stared at the ceiling, glaring at it as though it had offended him. He felt oddly refreshed and a little hungry, contemplating whether to venture down and chat with the villains. He checked the door and found it unlocked. He wondered if Banshee was there but received no response. Perhaps Banshee didn't want to talk, or maybe he was tired. As he walked down the hall, he heard some chatter. Peeking through the door, he saw some of the villains inside, the same ones from earlier. He wondered how long he had been asleep. Opening the door, he received a few side glances, but no one seemed particularly concerned, except for a certain blonde. Toga rushed over and enveloped him in a hug, catching him by surprise. She pulled away and asked how his nap had been. Izuku shrugged, admitting he didn't remember anything and had just woken up to talk with them, if they wanted to. Shigaraki stated that Izuku had some explaining to do, to which he responded with confusion. Toga interjected, pointing with her knife and asking if he knew Banshee, the alternate version of himself. Izuku nodded, confirming that Banshee was indeed a villain. Toga then asked if he wanted to be part of the League of Villains as the new villain, the one he would replace. Curious, Izuku asked who he would be replacing. Toga spun around excitedly, while 𝗀𝗶𝐻 sighed from his corner. Toga revealed that the villain he would replace was named Shadow, also known as Ryoki Satsujinki. She mentioned that he could change the name if he wanted, but it was ultimately his choice. Kurogiri face-bombed in the background, reminding Toga that Izuku was still a hero, albeit a dead one. Izuku smiled to himself, expressing that he would rather not return to being a hero, especially since people believed he was dead. He felt it was better this way. People were glad he was no longer a hero, and returning would only lead to more hate. A villain, however, would welcome the recognition. The four villains listening fell silent, and Toga noted that he was speaking like Banshee. Shigaraki's head flopped onto the table as Toga giggled. 𝗀𝗶𝐻 nodded, a small smile appearing on his stitched face, agreeing that Izuku would be great for the League of Villains if he could irritate Shigaraki so easily. Shigaraki groaned, his hands sliding off his face and resting on the table. Toga shouted for him to let Izuku join, while Kurogiri reminded them that he was still a hero, albeit a dead one, with the choice of betraying or returning to society. Izuku sighed, acknowledging the truth in Kurogiri's words. He then asked if he could at least do something that wasn't heroic, to get a feel for being a villain. The mist figure nodded, stating they had something he could help with right away. A week later, Izuku stood outside what appeared to be an abandoned hotel, accompanied by Toga and 𝗀𝗶𝐻. He asked if they remembered the plan, receiving a grunt and quiet giggles in response. After putting on his new mask, he felt the weight of the villain outfit they had prepared for him. It included a large black cape, an unusual shirt that resembled a CRP top, a belt with various holders for weapons, baggy jeans with secret compartments, and a piece of headgear that filtered air and altered his voice. All of it was dyed in red and black, complemented by his signature red shoes. After a week of training and planning, they were finally ready for the mission. Although he had only learned how to throw a knife during that time, he was determined to improve. He had received little information about their objective other than it involved a secret lab organized by the government to create special weapons for mobilizing villains, which could easily be turned against heroes. Reaching up to tap the mic beside his ear, he signaled that they were ready. Just then, the front of the building burst into blue flames. Smirking, he pulled on the hoodie of his outfit and declared it was time to go. The sound of someone screaming in the background began to grate on his nerves. 𝗟𝗶𝐸 yelled at Toga to be quiet, but she was too busy laughing at the chaos she was causing. Izuku groaned, wondering if this was what missions with her were like. 𝗟𝗶𝐸 welcomed him to hell, and Izuku prepared himself for the wild ride ahead. "Is your group done with the lab room?" Shiggy's raspy voice came through the earpiece. Clicking it again, the response was affirmative. Toga was just finishing off the last one, and they didn't need to take any of the vials. Shiggy instructed them to retrieve test vial QK63. Nodding even though he couldn't see, the message was relayed. Toga nodded, liking the remnants from her knife, while 𝗟𝗶𝐸 grunted and moved deeper into the room, following the BLD-dyed blonde. The thought crossed the mind about why they would need to steal from a poison lab. Did Shiggy want to poison someone? It seemed unlikely, as he could easily acquire such substances elsewhere. These vials were particularly dangerous, each one causing different reactions. The name QK63 was unfamiliar, likely destroyed when the building had been blown up. The distant sound of sirens broke through the thoughts. Urgently, the warning was shouted for 𝗟𝗶𝐸 and Toga to hurry. The police were on their way. 𝗟𝗶𝐸's response was to wait a few more minutes, but the tension rose as the urgency mounted. Toga peeked around the door, her eyes pleading for help. Rushing to them, an odd metal door was spotted on the wall, revealing 5 vials marked QK63. Pushing them back to obscure the view, 𝗟𝗶𝐸 was about to protest when a loud bang echoed as the door caved in, broken by a kick. 3 vials shattered, but 2 were snatched and moved into 𝗟𝗶𝐸's hands. A wince of pain shot through the leg, but it was manageable. They didn't know how many they needed, but 2 would suffice. The plan was to escape quickly. They bolted through the lab, navigating the bloody hallways from Toga's earlier rampage. Neither had the chance to take a life. It was all Toga's doing. 𝗟𝗶𝐸 shouted for 𝗟𝗶H𝗸 or anyone to open a portal as they ran, the sounds of chaos echoing from elsewhere in the building. 𝗟𝗶𝐸 instructed the group to reach the top of the building and prepare to jump on command. Eyes widened at the thought of jumping, but Toga nodded, changing course toward the emergency exit. 𝗟𝗶𝐸 followed, dragging along. As they ascended the stairs, some gave way beneath their feet, but they pressed on. Toga kicked down a red door at the top, sunlight flooding in for a moment before they slammed it shut. Toga stood at the edge, looking down with a mischievous smile, greeting the police and pro-hero Kamui Woods. The detective, Naomasa Tsukachi, ordered them to stand down, declaring they would not escape. The presence of an actual detective at the scene was unexpected, but it was not unusual for him to be there. Toga teased Tsukachi about his hero work, and the detective visibly flinched at the mention of a new villain in the league. The urgency grew as the sound of heavy footsteps approached. 𝗟𝗶𝐸, glancing back, expressed impatience, questioning how long they would remain there. The sound of a helicopter above signaled the news team's arrival. With a dramatic flair, a taunt was thrown at Tsukachi, suggesting he should inscribe a name on 𝗟𝗚𝐬𝐷's tombstone. The laughter from Toga added to the chaos, and the words felt like a release of guilt. The detective's question about how they knew 𝗟𝗚𝐬𝐷 was met with disbelief. A loud beep caught attention, and the command to jump came through the mic. Toga laughed maniacally before leaping off the side of the building, disappearing into the smoke. 𝗟𝗶𝐸 followed suit, twisting in midair with a gesture toward the crowd. The laughter was infectious, but the reality of the jump loomed. The fall seemed daunting, but a reminder of past heroics surfaced. The chilling feeling returned, mixed with an odd confidence. With a flourish, the declaration was made that the show was over for now, and few was out. Falling backward off the building, the heroes burst through the door below. The smoke enveloped the vision, leaving a sense of uncertainty in the air. I braced myself, anticipating the impact of hitting the ground again, unsure if I would survive this time. But instead of crashing down, It felt as if I had been plunged into icy water for a brief moment before being lifted out and landing in someone's arms. My legs were cradled in one arm while my back rested against the other, as if I were being carried like a princess. I instinctively snuggled into the person holding me, burying my face in their neck, not caring who it was. A whistle echoed from someone else in the room, followed by an excited remark about how adorable the scene was. Another voice, filled with annoyance, shouted for the person to keep their hands off their cousin. As I pulled away to see the person who had caught me, my eyes widened at the sight of a pink face, a blush creeping down to their neck. I felt my own cheeks heat up and quickly buried my face back into the crook of their neck, trying to hide my embarrassment. I could feel their heart racing, and our closeness made the moment even more intense. The atmosphere shifted as someone exclaimed that they hadn't meant to catch me in such a way. I could sense the strength of the person holding me, and their pleasant scent enveloped me, making me feel oddly comforted. Later, the holiday tree was finally up, but 𝗏𝐽 had the idea to set the first one on fire to see how appealing it would look, resulting in a pile of ashes. We had to find another tree, which was a challenge since villains couldn't just stroll into a store to buy one. Thankfully, Aunt Mitsuki allowed us to cut down her decorated tree outside. 𝐾𝐿 surprised us with gifts a day early, handing out new phones. Excitedly, I suggested playing a game called Among Us from my spot on the couch. 𝗏𝐽, sitting beside me and examining his device, agreed, and soon everyone else joined in, downloading the game. We decided to play a private game, and since most of the group was unfamiliar with the game mechanics, it turned out to be easier than expected. In the third round, I found myself as the imposter. I followed the blue crewmate quietly, turning off the generator to plunge the room into darkness. While everyone scrambled to restore the lights, I took the opportunity to eliminate 2 players. When the meeting was called, 𝗏𝗏 reported the bodies, her voice filled with urgency. As the group discussed the situation, I feigned innocence, asking where the bodies had been found. 𝗏𝗏 explained that they were near electrical, where everyone had been rushing to turn the lights back on. As the discussion continued, I suggested that 𝗏𝗏 seemed suspicious, which led to her being voted out, much to her protests. Unfortunately for us, she was not the imposter. After a few more rounds, I successfully eliminated another player and vented away just before someone else entered the room to report the body. The tension in the air was palpable as we debated who the imposter could be, with 𝗏𝐽 expressing frustration at the difficulty of the game. In the end, I managed to sabotage the security system and eliminate the last crewmate, leading to our victory. The revelation that I had been the imposter caused a mix of laughter and frustration among my friends, who couldn't believe they had lost to me, the youngest member of the league. As the night continued, I was pulled into someone's arms, feeling them nuzzle into my hair. Shigaraki's voice cut through the laughter, ordering the person to let go of me, while the others reacted with playful teasing. Despite my attempts to escape, I found myself comfortably settled in their lap, their arms around my waist. 𝗏𝗏, ever the photographer, began snapping pictures, ignoring my protests. The rest of the night blurred by as we played more games, and soon someone brought out a bottle of beer, leading to a lively atmosphere with many of us enjoying the festivities, while 𝗏𝐽 and I retreated to our room, avoiding the chaos. Locking the door ensured that none of the others could interrupt them. They were simply cuddling, nothing more. He ran his hand through her hair, chuckling when she purred contentedly. It was midnight, and the noise outside had yet to calm down. She sighed, feeling content as she fell asleep in his arms. As she drifted into the dreamscape, she heard one last thing from him, barely loud enough to hear. He wished her a Merry Christmas and sweet dreams, referring to her affectionately as his little bird. In the living area, 𝗏𝗏 danced around, chanting about 𝗏𝐽 and Izuku sitting in a tree, while the other villains cast amused glances in their direction. 𝗏𝐽 buried his face in her hair, trying to hide from 𝗏𝗏's antics. 𝗏𝗏 continued her playful teasing, insisting they were destined to be a couple in the future and even have babies. This made her face heat up with embarrassment, and she scolded 𝗏𝗏 for her comments. 𝗏𝗏 shrugged, insisting it was true and expressing her longing to be an aunt. 𝗏𝐽 pulled his face from her hair, dismissing the idea for now. She playfully punched his arm, feeling a mix of embarrassment and frustration. He laughed, suggesting that it wasn't bad to speak the truth, even if it felt one-sided. A pang of pain and guilt settled in her chest, leaving her confused about her feelings. She nudged him gently, apologizing for any upset she may have caused. He responded with a half-hearted laugh, his voice tinged with sadness, which tugged at her heart. Feeling the weight of everyone's gaze upon her, she decided to leave the room, hearing murmurs of concern behind her. She stormed to their shared room, curling up on the bed and lost in her thoughts. She reminded herself that she wasn't an official member of the League of Villains, just someone who had the chance to return to her normal life if she chose. Doubts crept in about whether she had made the right choice in becoming a villain. She wrestled with her thoughts, reflecting on the fact that she still viewed herself as an outcast. She needed to believe she was part of the group, otherwise, she would always feel left out. The voice in her head reminded her that everyone had their reasons for becoming villains, just as they once had dreams of being heroes. It was essential to have a reason for her choices, whether as a villain or a hero. As she stared at the ceiling, she considered the similarities between the two paths. If the world were flipped, perhaps villains would be heroes and vice versa. She felt the need to articulate her thoughts, blinking at the ceiling until her mind began to race. The voice urged her to uncover her reason for becoming a villain, suggesting that it was something significant she had yet to acknowledge. Frustrated, she sat up, pulling at her hair in exasperation. She questioned why the voice seemed to know more about her life than she did. The voice explained that she might still be viewing her situation through a hero's lens. It encouraged her to reconsider her perspective on heroes and villains, suggesting that her thoughts were still aligned with the ideals of heroism. Determined to shift her mindset, she pondered how to think like a villain. The voice challenged her to articulate her views on heroes, pushing her to confront her beliefs and ultimately discover her true motivations. Always saving others, fighting villains, protecting civilians. This was the life of a hero. Yet, there was a voice in the back of his mind questioning the very essence of heroism. It reminded him that beneath the costumes and glory, many heroes were not what they seemed. As he racked his memory, he recalled a moment from school about a month ago. His eyes widened as a realization struck him. The reason he had jumped off the building was becoming clearer. Yes, he was close, but that wasn't the whole picture. Better than nothing, he thought, feeling a flicker of optimism. How could he remain so hopeful? He preferred not to dwell on that. It had something to do with how people had changed after 𝐼𝐼𝐻𝐷's death. They had blamed him, and the weight of that accusation hung heavily in the air. He paused, contemplating the implications. Was it about him and Katsuki? He jumped slightly, startled by the thought. He had been talking out loud, perhaps sounding a bit unhinged to anyone who might have overheard. Not important, a voice in his mind muttered. Moving on, he continued to ponder. He needed to remember what had happened, especially the blame that had been cast upon him after 𝐼𝐼𝐻𝐷's passing. But what was it? No, he was on the wrong path. He needed to think again. After what felt like hours of contemplation, though it was only a few minutes, he finally grasped something. He recalled a villain he had fought, one with a similar goal. Now he just had to remember which one it was. How many villains had he fought? Did facing the same ones repeatedly count? No, it didn't. He had only fought this particular villain once, and while he had been injured, it hadn't been as severe as what his friend had endured. This villain had ultimately been defeated, sent to Tartarus. He suddenly exclaimed that he was talking about the fight with that villain, a realization hitting him hard. About time too, the voice in his mind replied. His reason for becoming a villain was rooted in the corruption of hero society. The way they had treated him, the way they had pushed him to the brink. What kind of hero did that? Not just the heroes, but even those in training, along with the very citizens he was meant to protect. This made him see the worst in people. Isn't that the point? The voice replied. He blinked, confused. What did that mean? If one only saw the good in everyone, they would miss the flaws, the lies, and the schemes. By seeing all sides of a person, one could discern who they truly were, whether they were good or horrible. He thought. He felt a pang of sympathy for the voice, realizing it must have endured a terrible life to view humanity in such a way. Don't be sorry, they're all gone now. I can't be bothered to remember them anyway. The voice sounded indifferent, almost detached. Technically immortal now, so there was no need to dwell on the past. Just then, a quiet voice broke the silence, and the door creaked open to reveal a blonde girl. She walked over and sat beside him on the bed, asking if he was okay. This was so out of character for her. He responded, unconvincingly, that he was fine. She let out a puff of air, clearly unconvinced. She had heard him yelling and talking to someone outside the door. Was it Mr. Banshee? He couldn't help but snicker at the name. Yeah, it was Mr. Banshee, he confirmed. The voice in his mind protested, feeling insulted. They were, in fact, the same person, he laughed. What did he say? She asked, her excitement palpable. He mentioned that Mr. Banshee was bothered by the nickname and suggested they come up with a different one. Oh, come on, it's not that bad. He insisted, winking at her. She chuckled, placing a hand on her chin in thought. How about Mr. 𝐼𝐻𝐵𝐻𝐿? She suggested with a serious expression. They shared a mini staring contest, both appearing to be engaged in an important meeting. Moments later, they burst into laughter. She breathed heavily, clutching her stomach as 𝐼𝐻𝐵 entered the room, his face stricken with confusion at the sight of their amusement. What the? He muttered, glancing at Shigaraki, who peeked inside before turning away, mumbling to himself. If this becomes the new normal, please end me now, 𝐼𝐻𝐵 groaned, though the smile on his face betrayed his true feelings. A few days later, while everyone was asleep, he found himself in a quiet, dreamless slumber, something he wasn't accustomed to. Normally, his dreams were haunted by screams and visions of everyone dying around him, blaming him for it all. But this time, it was just a void of darkness, with a solid ground beneath him. As he walked in circles, he felt smooth walls on all sides. A stone room, he wondered. Then a voice grumbled through the silence, causing him to jump and spin around, searching for its source. It was familiar, though he had only heard it once before. He would never forget what had happened at 𝐾𝐻𝐻𝐬. All for one. He growled, refusing to acknowledge the title. Hello, my son, the voice responded, sounding both joyful and pitiful. Don't you dare call me that. I know what you did. I'm not stupid, he shouted, his voice echoing in the confined space. How are you even here? Aren't you in Tartarus? A low chuckle came from the unseen figure. What do you mean? There are many things I've done. Which one are you referring to? He huffed in frustration. You married my mother to have me, only to take away my quirk. Isn't that right? That's why you left. Why weren't you there for me for 15 years? Calm down. No, you are wrong. Say it then. Why did you leave me with Mom? Was it because I was born quirkless? The son of the strongest villain in the world, quirkless. Izuku Midoriya. His voice boomed and he cowered, sitting on the ground and covering his ears. He stared at the floor, wide-eyed, as tears began to fall. Stupid crybaby. Voices echoed around him, singing like a haunted lullaby, and all for one fell silent as the laughter rang through the darkness. It sounded like children's laughter, and he screamed, but it wasn't his voice. It was a screeching noise, inhuman and terrifying. Pain surged through him, as if his skin were tearing apart. He screeched again, scratching at his throat. Then, just as suddenly, the pain stopped. He collapsed on the cold floor, his eyes watering. Izuku, I gave you something to help, but would you mind telling me who that is? The question barely registered as I regained my bearings. I slowly got up, sensing another presence in the room. Turning around, I was startled to see. The other me mumbled a greeting while scratching his head. His features began to shift, and soon he was dressed in an unusual outfit, primarily black, white, and red. A cape flowed against his shoulders, and his glowing red eyes stood out against his almost black hair, which had red stripes running through it. Bandit, I gasped, and he shrugged, a smile on his face. He introduced himself as the one and only, before bowing and standing up straight, glancing around the room. He asked if I knew where we were or what was happening, but I shook my head, indicating I was just as lost as he was. Banshee shivered, glaring around the room as he recalled a familiar voice. He mentioned that it had been a long time since he heard that voice and referred to All for One, making a quip about him being a ripoff of a famous character. The other me and I exchanged a glance and laughed, both of us surprised by the coincidence of sharing the same name. Banshee was incredulous, questioning how it was possible for both of us to be named Izuku. He wondered if he was still dreaming, but we confirmed that it was not 𝐴. Banshee then noted that it seemed I already knew how to use my quirk, which prompted a confused response from me. 𝐿 explained that he had given me a quirk to ease my pain, which turned out to be imaginary. I was baffled and sought clarification. With a loud sigh, he revealed that he had been planning to make me the heir to his organization, someone who would lead us into a better future without heroes disrupting society. To do that, he needed to return the quirk he had taken for my safety. I interrupted him, realizing that he had indeed stolen my quirk. Banshee protested, but we continued to ignore him. 𝐿 insisted that he had taken it to protect me, which led me to question what he was protecting me from. All Might, my own mother. His answer was simply everything, which left a heavy silence in the air. I stared at the ceiling, trying to imagine 𝐿's expression. Banshee tapped his foot, arms crossed, waiting for someone to break the silence. Eventually, he sighed, expressing that 𝐿's explanation was vague. I agreed, adding my own sarcastic remark. Banshee playfully scolded me for swearing, claiming that I was too innocent for such language. I countered that if we were the same person, he shouldn't be able to scold me either. Banshee claimed to be over 1,000 years old, which made me question the possibility of such an age. I attempted to calculate his age in a humorous way, but he cut me off, asking what 𝐿 meant by everything. 𝐿 explained that it referred to anything that could negatively impact my life, particularly the constant danger linked to the quirk I was born with. Banshee asked how my quirk could be dangerous, and 𝐿 reminded us that possessing such a quirk made me one of the most powerful beings alive. Banshee responded with a mocking tone, reminding him that I was born with the same quirk. He suggested that using it could lead to significant consequences. Suspicion arose from many heroes, including All Might. The possibility of being hunted by other villains who might find use for his power lingered in the air. 𝐿 lectured about the potential dangers of keeping such a quirk. Banshee expressed surprise at the situation, pondering his new identity as a villain. He reflected on the implications of giving back the quirk, which 𝐿 confirmed was his intention if the original owner desired it. A heavy silence followed, and Izuku quietly questioned why he hadn't been taken along when 𝐿 discovered his quirk. 𝐿 hesitated before responding, explaining that the life of constant danger and training would have changed Izuku for the worse. He believed that keeping Izuku away from villains and taking his quirk would protect him from the heroes as well, ensuring that both he and his mother, 𝐒𝐮𝐲, could find happiness. Izuku inhaled sharply, feeling the weight of his mother's name. He declared that 𝐿 would never be his father, having been absent from his life for so long and leaving his mother to care for him alone. Forgiveness felt impossible, at least for now. Banshee, floating in a seated position, acknowledged the complexity of their relationship, expressing love and care for Izuku as his son, hoping that one day those feelings would be mutual. He wished Izuku to rest well. The atmosphere shifted as 𝐿's voice echoed in Izuku's mind, reminding him of their last encounter when 𝐿 had tried to defeat All Might. Izuku felt a surge of anger, wishing they had never met. 𝐿, now in a position of power, assured Izuku that he meant no harm and had something hard to believe to share. Intrigued, Izuku listened as 𝐿 revealed the shocking truth of their connection, claiming to be his father. Izuku stared in disbelief, feeling as though he was facing a madman. He dismissed the claim, expressing his disdain for the idea that he would react with joy. 𝐿 chuckled, acknowledging that he didn't expect such a response. He insisted that the truth was better than the lies Izuku had been told about heroes and villains. Izuku glared at the imagined version of 𝐿, resolute in his refusal to be swayed by whatever twisted ideas had formed during his time in Tartarus. 𝐿 chuckled again, asserting that despite the current animosity, there would always be a place for Izuku, and one day he would feel the same. This chapter focuses on the relationship between Izuku and 𝗟𝗶𝐻, two individuals seemingly fated to be together. It promises to be a long love story, avoiding the typical clichés of immediate declarations of love. Izuku blinked his eyes open, feeling tired despite a full night's sleep. He almost didn't notice that he and 𝗁𝐷 were cuddling again in their sleep. It felt as if the world was conspiring to bring them together, which was an odd thought. The position they were in would have been comfortable if they were dating. 𝗁𝐷 had his face buried in Izuku's hair, his arms wrapped around him, their legs tangled together. Izuku's hands were pressed to his chest, feeling the warmth of 𝗁𝐷's body. His heart began to race and his face flushed. Love was indeed a mysterious thing. Izuku found himself tempted to fall back asleep, but the morning light streaming through the window prompted him to wake 𝗁𝐷 in a playful way. He shoved 𝗁𝐷 off the bed, causing him to grunt in surprise. Izuku stifled a laugh as 𝗁𝐷 blinked at him with tired eyes, a glare forming on his face, though there was no real anger there. 𝗁𝐷 grabbed Izuku's arm and pulled him down, causing Izuku to yelp as he landed on top of him. 𝗁𝐷 chuckled at Izuku's reaction, who found himself resting against 𝗁𝐷's rib cage, feeling the strength beneath him. Izuku whined, lifting his head to see 𝗁𝐷 staring back at him with a smug grin. Flushing again, he looked away and asked if 𝗁𝐷 was going to get off. In his attempt to move, he accidentally kneed 𝗁𝐷 in a sensitive area. Apologizing profusely, Izuku felt embarrassed. 𝗁𝐷 muttered in surprise, and Izuku realized he was still on top of him. Their eyes locked, and Izuku felt the intensity of the moment, the closeness overwhelming. Just then, Toga burst through the door, shouting to wake them up. They both stared at her, Izuku's face burning with embarrassment. Toga's eyes widened in shock at the sight of them, and she quickly ran out of the room, screaming about what she had seen. 𝗁𝐷 shouted after her, and Izuku couldn't help but find the situation amusing. Getting up from the floor, he dusted himself off and made his way downstairs, where he was suddenly enveloped in a tight hug from Shigaraki. Toga and 𝗁𝐷 were now rolling on the ground in a playful wrestling match. Spinner shook his head at the scene, Mr. Compress recorded it, and twice cheered them on, while Shigaraki complained about Izuku being too young to have a boyfriend. Izuku found Shigaraki's behavior strange, as he had thought Shigaraki disliked him. Perhaps learning about their familial connection had changed things, making Shigaraki treat him more like family. Sitting on a bar stool, Izuku noticed Shigaraki's head tilt in a way that suggested sadness. This made Izuku's heart ache, reminiscent of the times he had seen his mother cry. He shook his head, dismissing those thoughts. 𝗂𝐻𝐽 placed a cup in front of him, and Izuku glanced up, receiving a nod from 𝗂𝐻𝐽. He picked up the cup, sniffing the orange scent wafting from it. After thanking 𝗂𝐻𝐽, he drank it all. 𝗁𝐷 and Toga had stopped there. Playful fight, with Toga clinging to Twice's back while 𝗁𝐷 stood nearby, glaring at her. Izuku leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes, feeling an overwhelming fatigue wash over him. He recalled a dream he had the previous night, where his father had visited him. The thought of the new quirk he had acquired crossed his mind, and he wondered what it could do. After a moment of contemplation, he realized he didn't know how to use this quirk. Feeling frustrated, he expressed his annoyance, but the voice in his head reminded him that they were essentially the same person, and it was natural for them to share similar traits. Izuku pondered the implications of their connection, realizing that it might be time to explore this new aspect of himself. Who am I kidding? Yes, you're a jerk. Izuku jolted backward, almost falling off the seat. He noticed in the corner of his eye that 𝗁𝐷 had attempted to help him, but then backed away with a flushed face. Toga sighed and asked if he had been talking with Mr. Scary Breathes. Izuku stared at her, straight-faced, while everyone listening seemed confused. Then, they both burst out laughing. They found each other annoying, but it was all in good fun. The familiar feeling of nearly passing out returned, and Izuku thought about using his quirk. After what felt like months of searching, though it was really just a week and a half, Izuku was still not found. That changed when someone burst into the hero meeting at UA, screaming about a discovery. A random hero who patrolled the area near Kamino reported that they had found a body resembling a small yet muscular boy. The body had been burned and was discovered in a dumpster, still wrapped in bandages as if the boy had recently been in the hospital. The heroes in the meeting were shocked, hoping the news wasn't true. Upon examining the corpse, they found evidence of torture, with signs that the male had been stabbed. The wounds were fresh, making it clear who it could be. 𝐼𝐻𝐻 informed Class 1A of the findings, stating that while it wasn't confirmed the body belonged to Midoriya, there wasn't enough evidence to rule it out. UA was slowly falling apart, just as the villains had intended. Back with the villains, Banshee floated upside down, discussing his quirk while Toga attempted to stab him with her knife, and 𝗀𝐿 sat on the couch, watching and listening. Banshee mused about immortality and pain, dodging another swipe from Toga. 𝗀𝐿 thoughtfully remarked that unless someone had already died, they would still feel pain. Banshee agreed, nodding. Toga leapt up, aiming straight at Banshee's chest, but he danced across the room, avoiding her attack with ease. He grinned as Toga stumbled and fell with an annoyed grunt, taunting her to try harder if she wanted to kill someone. Banshee, dressed in his villain outfit with a cape that resembled a scarf, quickly disarmed Toga by shooting a shadow at her knife. He twirled in the air, landing next to 𝗀𝐿 on the couch. Toga pouted, feeling frustrated. Banshee teased 𝗀𝐿, asking if he could call him Stitch Face. 𝗀𝐿, lost in thought, shook his head and suggested he preferred to be called glowering with pride. Banshee laughed, saying 𝗀𝐿 should tell Izuku that it would embarrass him. Toga giggled and asked if Banshee shipped them too, to which he nodded enthusiastically. He jokingly added that he wanted to be kept out of the way during their private moments. 𝗀𝐿 blushed and tried to hide his face in his hands. Shigaraki called out to 𝗀𝐿, and Banshee growled in response, telling him not to call him that. The group erupted in laughter until Banshee started coughing. 𝗀𝐿 asked if he was all right, but Banshee couldn't respond. He covered his mouth, feeling something rise in his throat, and wiped away a few drops of crimson liquid from his lips. He muttered that he needed to go and got up from the couch. Toga, curious, asked if something was wrong, while 𝗀𝐿 decided to check on him. As 𝗀𝐿 walked through the hall, he found Banshee's door ajar. Pushing it open, he saw Banshee collapsed at the side of the bed, his head and arms on the mattress, eyes closed with BLD on his lips. Panic settled in 𝗀𝐿 as he rushed over, wondering what had happened. He turned Banshee to sit against the bed frame and called out to him. Banshee's hair was fading, the red stripes disappearing, which only concerned 𝗀𝐿 more. Just then, Banshee's emerald eyes opened, staring at 𝗀𝐿 with curiosity. 𝗀𝐿 pulled Izuku into a hug, leaving both of them momentarily speechless. 𝗀𝐿 felt a wave of embarrassment wash over him, while Izuku's face turned a deep shade of red, confusion evident in his expression. Their hearts raced with the unexpected closeness, Izuku lost in a whirlwind of emotions and 𝗀𝐿 trying to conceal his blush by burying his face in the crook of Izuku's neck. A warm, tingling sensation enveloped them, bringing a sense of contentment that neither had anticipated. Izuku smiled softly and returned the embrace, letting out a gentle sigh. He pondered the feeling, wondering what it was that felt so pleasant. The memory of that final fight lingered vividly in his mind. The monster was relentless, devoid of mercy or emotion, consumed only by rage. It was a terrifying sight. If one were to forget the past and focus on the present, they might believe this creature had ravaged the lands. He felt a sense of relief that no one witnessed the battle, especially the last embarrassing moment he and 𝐾𝐿 shared as they faced their fate. All he wanted to remember from that day was the moment he died, not alone as he had feared, but with someone holding him as his heart ceased to beat. It pained him to recall 𝐾𝐿's tears, but that was inconsequential. He had saved 𝐾𝐿 from sharing his grim fate, from being punished by serving different versions of himself, dying repeatedly. For a fleeting moment, he had become 𝐾𝐿's hero. It was worth it, knowing that everyone he loved was at peace, while he alone bore the suffering. Long live life. Screams echoed all around, on the right, on the left, and more in the distance. He sighed, wrapping his cloak tighter around himself, not for warmth, but to shield his body from prying eyes. The ground beneath him was a sea of lava and fire, littered with bones and remnants of the past, but he paid them no mind. He heard a voice yelling, "Die," but he ignored it, continuing his walk toward a towering spire of jagged rock. Sometimes he thought hell truly was a dreadful place. He witnessed someone fall into a pit of lava, their desperate cries mingling with the laughter of onlookers. Approaching the high metal gates of a castle, he sensed someone behind him. Rolling his eyes, he braced himself for what was to come. "Hey cutie, what are you doing all alone?" The voice slurred as if intoxicated. He groaned, "Leave me alone. I'm tired and don't need anyone bothering me tonight." Feisty. That was the last straw. He turned around, throwing off his cloak, fury igniting within him. "I'm going to send you back to heaven," he shouted, his voice echoing with intensity. The figure before him raised its claws, flexing them and licking its lips. It was an ugly sight, a common devil with red skin, sharp black claws, long horns, and a pinched face. But what stood out were its black eyes, unlike any he had seen before. "I don't know. It wouldn't be too hard," he replied smugly, his tail arching behind him as he examined his own long nails. "Give you one last chance before—" Suddenly, he felt the ground drop. Away beneath him, gasping, he found himself tumbling through a kaleidoscope of colors, disoriented as he fell through a wormhole. As he landed with a thud, he stumbled slightly, his head spinning. "Where am I?" he wondered aloud. Before him stood a group of people, weapons drawn, their eyes wide with surprise. One figure stepped forward, looking strangely familiar, though he couldn't quite place it. This person was covered in hands. "Who are you and how did you find us?" the figure demanded, its hand raised inches from his face. "My name is Izuku, but you can call me Deku, or Prince of—" "Let's skip that. Who are you all?" he exclaimed excitedly, shaking the figure's hand as they stared at him in a mix of awe and fear. "Izuku, but that's my name." Another male stepped forward, sharing his fluffy green hair but appearing more human, a scar marking his face and a red pupil in his eye. Could it be that he was in another dimension? Different universes, tiny me. "In my world, I sold my soul to Satan or Lucifer, whatever you prefer. Now I'm the most feared demon in hell," he declared, grinning widely as his tail flicked through the air. They all stared at him as if he were mad. "That would explain the horns, tail, pale skin, and your sharp claws and teeth," the hand-covered figure noted, tilting its head in curiosity. "Oh, I finally recognize you. You're Tenko. Wow, this is so strange," he exclaimed, finally recalling some familiar faces. "Toga. BLD partners. W. Still sticking with that name. Compressat. Twice. You look adorable. Spinner. Still wearing Stain's merch, I see." He greeted everyone present, excitement bubbling within him. "Wow. I haven't seen you all in over 100 years. You all look so young." 100 years. Toga echoed, astonished. As they settled into the living area, he noticed the closeness between the other version of himself and 𝗟𝗶𝐻. Being in hell is different from heaven. In heaven, time moves faster than on earth, while in hell, it slows down. 100 years here is like 1 year on earth, he explained, still grinning. They all nodded in understanding. "What type of demon are you?" 𝗟𝗶𝐻 asked, leaning forward with curiosity. He frowned, a familiar frustration rising within him. "I am an incubus." Izuku was focused on figuring out how to use his new quirk, but so far, he hadn't even managed to activate it. He expressed his frustration, wondering why he couldn't just ask his father for help, only to remember that he couldn't simply walk into 𝗏𝗏𝗏 to do so. He contemplated the idea of breaking someone out telepathically, but quickly dismissed it, groaning and burying his face in his hands. The villain base was expansive, mostly underground, and he found himself in a training room that was more of a space with mats on the floor and a closet full of weapons. The walls were lined with various holes and spider webs, remnants of his knife-throwing practice with Toga. He spoke aloud, trying to channel the power of his quirk, questioning if he needed to visualize what he wanted to create. Frustrated, he shouted at the wall, seeking answers that didn't come. He clenched his fist, feeling the rush of pain when he punched the wall, but his attention was quickly diverted by an explosion that sent dust flying into his face. Coughing, he looked up to see a crater where the wall had been. As footsteps approached, he heard Toga's voice calling out to him, but she stopped short when she saw the destruction. He waved awkwardly, unsure of how to respond to her shocked expression. Toga then leaped forward, hugging him tightly and squealing in excitement over the wall's destruction. Izuku laughed nervously, admitting that it hadn't been part of his plan but was glad it had happened. Toga offered her help, and after a moment of hesitation, he agreed. She pulled him aside with a bright grin, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. He explained that he was trying to use a new quirk given to him by 𝐿 but didn't know how to activate it. Toga listened intently, her excitement growing as he described the quirk's ability to create imaginary people, similar to Twice. Encouraged, she instructed him to visualize the person he wanted to bring to life. Izuku closed his eyes, focusing on the image of Banshee from his dreams, recalling the details of his appearance. Toga urged him to imagine Banshee as if he were a real person, capable of breathing, talking, and moving. As he concentrated, the image in his mind suddenly vanished, leaving him uncertain if it had worked. Toga urged him to open his eyes, and when he did, he was startled to see Banshee standing before him, inspecting himself with a wide smile. The realization that it had worked filled him with excitement. Banshee confirmed that it was indeed successful, and they could now exist as two separate beings. Izuku was amazed at the potential of his quirk, wondering how it allowed him to communicate with Banshee. Toga speculated about the quirk's abilities, suggesting that Izuku might even be able to change his appearance like Banshee. Just as Toga was about to suggest testing the quirk further, her expression shifted, and she hesitated, her gaze dropping to the ground. Izuku felt a pang in his heart, sensing that she didn't fully trust him yet. He quickly reassured her that he would earn her trust, trying to maintain a brave face despite the sting of tears in his eyes. Toga looked at him with concern, insisting that it wasn't about trust but something else entirely. The shout interrupted her mid-sentence, and the frustration surged within. Dark thoughts invaded the mind, echoing with the taunts of self-doubt. Those voices rang again, relentless and mocking. "It's fine. Just go." Sitting down against the wall, knees hugged tightly, the silence felt heavy. Izuku felt Banshee's hesitation, a moment of uncertainty before she spoke. "I said I'm fine." The anger slipped into the tone, a defense against the vulnerability. The excitement of learning to use the quirk faded away, leaving an emptiness. Minutes passed in silence until the sound of retreating footsteps echoed through the hallway, fading up the stairs to the main floor. "Izuku," Banshee muttered softly after a moment. "What?" The response came sharply, the tension thick in the air. "What was wrong? Why push everyone away? First All Might, then 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐃𝐞𝐭. And now most of the League. Did I not belong anywhere? That's not true." "Shut up." The shout rang out, hands covering ears in desperation. "Stop lying to me." It was only then that the presence of another entered the room, pulling Izuku from the ground into a hug. Surprise coursed through as he recognized 𝗂𝗶𝐻, the warmth enveloping him. Toga and Banshee watched from a distance, their expressions a mix of concern and curiosity. One of 𝗂𝗶𝐻's hands trailed down his spine, an odd yet comforting sensation. Whispers filled the air, but the sobs drowned out the words. "Why am I such a crybaby?" "You are not a crybaby, Izuku. You just have pent-up feelings. It's okay to release them once in a while. Go on, let it all out." The softness in 𝗂𝗶𝐻's voice encouraged the release, and Izuku cried harder, grateful for the understanding. Arms wrapped around 𝗂𝗶𝐻, completing the embrace, tears staining the fabric of his jacket. After a moment, exhaustion began to settle in. "Feeling better, little bird?" 𝗂𝗶𝐻 asked, and a small smile broke through the tears. "But you two are practically made for each other," Banshee commented, earning glares from both Izuku and 𝗂𝗶𝐻. Pulling away. The warmth was missed immediately, and 𝗂𝗶𝐻's expression shifted to one of disappointment, causing a chill in Izuku's stomach. "Anyways." Toga clapped her hands, drawing attention back to her. "I talked to Shiggy, and he says he has something to say to you." Banshee shot her a pointed look. "Can't you just tell him?" Toga scowled. "I'm not the one who needs a hug from their long-lost cousin. I don't want to do the initiation either." "Initiation?" Izuku echoed, curiosity piqued. Toga nodded, grabbing his arm and pulling him back upstairs, the others following closely. Back in the bar, it was nearly empty except for 𝐾𝐿 at the bar, Shigaraki perched on a stool, and Spinner and Twice in the corner. Toga shoved Izuku in front of Shigaraki, who had removed his mask and placed it on the table beside a glass filled with a brown-golden liquid. Shigaraki looked up, his eyes hidden in the shadows of his hair, and the air grew tense as Izuku waited for him to speak. Finally, he broke the silence. "Izuku, I wanted to make it official." Banshee snickered, breaking the tension. "Make what official, crusty but lips?" Laughter erupted from the others, while Shigaraki shot glares at the group. "F off, old man," he retorted, irritation evident. "What's official?" Izuku asked, eager to hear the words aloud, even though he had an inkling of what it was about. Shigaraki wrinkled his nose, his expression shifting. "You already know." Izuku pouted, poking at Shigaraki's shoulder, prompting giggles from behind him. "Could you tell me to clarify?" Shigaraki sighed, clearly exasperated. "All right, fine." "Izuku." Standing tall, a smile spread across Izuku's face. "You're an official member of the league." Joy surged through him as he fist-bumped the air, whooping with excitement. Toga jumped on Banshee, celebrating with glee while he protested to get her off. Then, a familiar hug enveloped him from behind, and he recognized 𝗂𝐿𝐵's warmth again. Flushing, Izuku placed his hands over 𝗂𝐿𝐵's, which were wrapped around his stomach. Toga squealed, but Izuku was too distracted to care. "𝗂𝐿𝐵, what are you doing?" He stuttered, feeling the vibrations of 𝗂𝐿𝐵's growl against him. "Congratulating you with a hug. I'm also tired, so let me sleep." Izuku stiffened. "Wait. Don't fall asleep on me." 𝗂𝐿𝐵 let out a dry laugh. "I wasn't actually going to, but if you insist." "No. I know." Izuku whined, laughter bubbling inside. 𝗂𝐿𝐵 nuzzled into his hair again, a familiar gesture that brought comfort. The atmosphere lightened, filled with laughter, and even Shigaraki wore a smile. Izuku's heart raced, happiness flooding through him. He felt accepted, as if he had finally found a place to belong. He was finally home. Izuku sat in the living area, a room equipped with a couch and a TV, spacious enough for everyone present. Twice lingered by the door, Shigaraki and 𝗂𝐿𝐵 occupied the couch, Toga sat crisscrossed on the floor, Mr. Compress was on the worn love seat, and Banshee floated upside down from the ceiling. Izuku found himself nestled between 𝗂𝐿𝐵 and Shigaraki. Toga began to speak, her tone drawn out. She mentioned a scientist who had been assisting Shigaraki with various matters. Shigaraki explained that their partner, Maruta Shiga, was the one who had informed Izuku of his quirkless status. The atmosphere shifted as Izuku noticed the solemn expressions around him, prompting him to acknowledge the unspoken tension. He took a deep breath and reassured them that it was okay if they didn't want to share details. 𝗂𝐿𝐵, however, abruptly turned to him, gripping his face to gain his attention, causing Izuku to blush. 𝗂𝐿𝐵 quickly clarified that it wasn't a matter of trust but rather that the project was significant and not widely known among the league members. Banshee, ever the lively one, urged them to reveal the details, expressing his eagerness to learn about the project. The group exchanged uncertain glances, still hesitant to fully trust Izuku. He reminded himself to stay positive, not wanting their pity. Toga finally began to explain, but Shigaraki interrupted her, insisting they refer to their leader as Sensei. Toga rolled her eyes but continued, revealing that Sensei needed an heir or someone to take over. Banshee jokingly inquired if that meant Shigaraki was out of the running, which prompted laughter among the group. Toga excitedly shared that part of the project involved the heir undergoing a process to retrieve something special, and she announced that Sensei had nominated Izuku for this role. The others encouraged him, and even Shigaraki wore a smile, which puzzled Izuku. He had thought Shigaraki desired leadership for himself. As Izuku contemplated the implications of being named heir, he questioned what made him worthy of leading the League of Villains. Shigaraki pointed out that being Sensei's son gave him a certain standing, while 𝗂𝐿𝐵 emphasized Izuku's capabilities, noting his thoughtfulness and intelligence. Izuku felt overwhelmed by the compliments, unsure how to process them. 𝗂𝐿𝐵's words struck a chord, revealing that he had been paying attention to Izuku's potential. Despite the confusion swirling in his mind about his feelings toward 𝗂𝐷𝐷, he couldn't deny a connection. Banshee reassured Izuku that he was indeed a great villain, despite his self-doubt. The playful banter between Banshee and Shigaraki escalated, filling the room with a cacophony of teasing and laughter, causing some of the other villains to leave in search of quieter surroundings. Izuku watched the lively exchange, feeling a mix of emotions as he considered the weight of the responsibilities that lay ahead. 𝗂𝐷𝐷 mumbled under his breath about the noise level. The laughter that followed came easily as I imagined how loud the blonde could be. As we settled into the bar, 𝗂𝐷𝐷 let out a low chuckle while we closed the door, shutting out the chaos of the two outside who were shouting threats. I wondered if we should be concerned about them, especially when a loud bang echoed from the other side. Toga shook her head, advising against getting involved if we wanted to stay safe. Twice raised his hand, his eyes curving upward in what seemed like a smile. He confidently declared a bet, suggesting that Shigaraki would win in a match against the other unsettling individual. Then, his expression shifted as he struggled to remember the name. I provided it, feeling a bit awkward saying it aloud for only the second time. I noted that both of them were still alive, smiling to myself. 𝗂𝐷𝐷 laughed, and Toga asked if the fight had begun yet. I mentally checked in with the situation, realizing they hadn't started grappling or wrestling. I shook my head, relaying that they were not engaged in combat. Toga let out an exaggerated sigh, throwing her hands in the air and lying back dramatically. I laughed at her antics and urged for a straightforward answer instead of her usual procrastination. 𝗂𝐷𝐷 tilted his head, waiting for me to elaborate on what was happening. Toga's smile revealed her sharp canines as she dramatically announced the surprise. 𝗂𝐻𝐬 chimed in, hinting at something special. I nodded, encouraging them to continue. Spinner added that it would make me complete, while Twice mentioned what I would be obtaining. Mr. Compress lifted his top hat, revealing his mask, and declared the source of the power. 𝗂𝐷𝐷 finished the statement with a grin, revealing the name that left me in shock. I struggled to process what they were saying, disbelief washing over me. No way could this be true. Once upon a time in a bustling city, a young hero named Alex embarked on a quest to uncover the truth behind a series of mysterious events plaguing the community. With determination in his heart, he gathered his friends, each possessing unique abilities, to aid him in this endeavor. As they ventured deeper into the heart of the city, they encountered challenges that tested their strength and resolve. Shadows lurked in every corner, hinting at a darkness that threatened to engulf them. The group faced formidable foes, their battles intense yet filled with a sense of camaraderie. Each clash was a dance of skill and strategy, where the heroes fought valiantly, narrowly escaping the grasp of danger. During one particularly tense encounter, Alex felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He knew that the fate of his friends rested in his hands, and he pushed himself to the limits, channeling his inner strength. The air crackled with energy as they fought, the stakes higher than ever. As the journey continued, the bonds between the friends grew stronger. They shared laughter and moments of vulnerability, each supporting the other through the trials they faced. The challenges they overcame only solidified their resolve to confront the looming threat. With each step forward, Alex felt a sense of purpose guiding him. He was not just fighting for himself but for the people of the city who looked to him for hope. The adventure was far from over, and as they prepared for the next challenge, the heroes stood united, ready to face whatever lay ahead.